Grateful to have your knowledge and your expertise around astrology, also Vedic astrology, as well as mythology.
And so the sun cut the ribbon which held Pisces back through with the sea monster. So essentially we severed the connection to the sea monster, and Pisces now can swim off into the age of Aquarius. And at the age of Aquarius, he's pouring the water into the fish's mouth. So it's really quite profound. The knot is actually found on the top of the head of Cetus, which is tying Pisces together.
This is where Logos merges with Sophia. This is where the cave of Brahma fills with DMT and achieves this higher state of consciousness and enlightenment. And that is the purpose of the true Ark of the Covenant. This is all metaphor for what's actually happening inside of us and in humanity. Rob Comber, what a pleasure to have you on Think Tank this week. I'm super excited to have this conversation. We've been working a lot together for the last couple of weeks, in particular, ever since, I got introduced to you by Alan Green. I've definitely been really grateful to have your knowledge and your expertise around astrology, also Vedic astrology, as well as mythology. I would say you're probably one of the people that I've met that's truly an expert in the different mythos traditions around the globe. And it's definitely had a very large impact on the way that I have perceived not only the new discoveries, but also how I perceive the world. It's interesting because I have been, as I was looking back on my books, even like Philomath, going to Polymath, and then Polymath to Philosopher, I realized that I was actually, without even intending to do so, my first book was very much around number theory and arithmetic. My second book is very much around geometry. And a number in itself is arithmetic, and number in space is geometry, and number in time is music. And so my third book was also a lot about precise temperament tuning. It was introduced in the first book, but then also really became a major part of the second and third books. And then, I'm working on my fourth book now, which I haven't come up with a title for yet. It's probably something like Divine Avatar. But basically, that book is all about cosmology, which is number in space time. So number itself is arithmetic, number in space is geometry, number in time is music, and number in space time is cosmology. And probably there'll be another book as well, a fifth book, that will be rounding out what I'm calling the Penn Trivium. And that is number in time space, which is the knowledge that time both flows forward and backward, not only one direction, not only one arrow of time, but a much more expanded viewpoint on time. And that is number in time space. I see it as being purpose. Mm-hmm. So with that, let's get into this conversation about number in space time, and then transition also into the concepts of what it's going to mean to be number in time space, because I really see this as a transition for where we are as humanity is concerned. And a lot of the things that we thought were the mythologies, which are the fake aspects of the world, as we learned that, really maybe the only thing that's real in this matrix of mind is how we feel, mythos then takes on an ever increasing role in our archetypes of how we feel and our conditioning biases that are both subconscious, conscious, and unconscious altogether.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, so great to be here and speak with you. And yeah, what a ride this has been. I just want to go back actually to the first time I even saw you on social media. I think this is around the COVID time, so 2020. And it was the first time that I'd actually seen somebody drawing geometry. Mm-hmm. And live. And you were drawing it to classical music. And I have a sort of a profound connection to music, and classical music actually really helped heal a lot of trauma that I had. And so it was interesting that as you were drawing the geometry, and so then I was following in drawing the geometry and also with the classical music. And so that was like, oh, this is a person that is like a love of my own also. And so it's such a great way, because that geometry, as you know, just unlocks so many doors. I think probably more doors than anything else.
Yeah.
And the pattern recognition, and then also how you were looking at things like artworks, like Da Vinci's paintings and classical artwork and Renaissance. And so that was also a passion of mine as I trained at college as an artist. And so it was so great that there was someone online that was doing something that I had a passion for also. And then as you're expressing about the number in its different forms and evolutions, it reminds me of in the book that I wrote about the 7 liberal arts. And it was really interesting because it's something that I worked with and I have a passion for, but it was the concept of anchoring the astrology actually brought it out for me to write about the 7 liberal arts. And this is sort of like wisdom, as you know, that's kind of often lost to just scholarly realms. But I feel like there's a renaissance of that coming back into, like, everybody's going to relearn what the 7 liberal arts are. And funnily enough, you say about space-time, I actually wrote that the 8th liberal arts of the complete octave is the art of time-space, space-time. So it feels like there's a beautiful convergence. And I wrote that in the Taurus aspect of the book. So there's something about the Taurus energy and the 7 liberal arts. And of course, we know that many secret societies took the 7 liberal arts on as ways of initiation and teachings. And so I think that what you're sharing about this new book, what I'm sort of trying to help people anchor the mythology and stars into actual physical application. Yeah, I'm super excited at how they seem to be dovetailing in together.
Yeah, no, it's super true. And obviously, like everything else we're doing, it's almost as if it was planned this way or something. Almost as if, all of it was somehow part of a play that we're all just living out. It's very exciting to be a part of it for sure.
Yeah. And I would say that the music, obviously the book being the Lost Octave, was so connected to music and all of that. And it was interesting because it allowed me to recollect back from when I was a child that I was more interested in drawing musical notes and writing music. And I had more of a passion for that than I did actually writing or English. And so it was easier for me to understand symbols. And so writing music was sort of like a second nature to me. So this now, full circle, the book allowed me to bring music into astrology. And then that was another way where we could start to hear and listen to our birth charts. We can start to work with frequency and understand musical tone and sound. So I definitely think as we know, the polymath view, the synthesis of all that we've known in our history is now kind of coming back into a cohesive, unified experience or theory. And so I think people are going to be versed in, everybody's going to become polymaths as all of this is now being introduced.
Hi, I'm Robert Edward Grant. I invite you to explore my transformative books, Philomath and Polymath, each designed to expand your understanding of the world and ourselves. In Philomath, which means lover of learning, discover how mathematics weaves together physics, music, and prime number theory, revealing the universe's interconnected nature. It's more than a book, it's an enlightening voyage. Polymath builds on Philomath's insights, exploring the genius of thinkers like Pythagoras and Da Vinci, who used geometry to revolutionize science, art, and governance. Rediscover the polymathic roots that sparked past ages of enlightenment. Join me on this journey as well. Visit robertedwardgrant.com to get your copies today. Let's foster a new era of enlightenment and collaboration for a brighter future. I would tend to agree with that. I definitely tend to agree. I think we're all starting to become more and more polymathic without even intentionally being that. I think it's just kind of part of the next aspect of this, age of Aquarius.
Yeah, absolutely. And my study, I would say, as it's evolved and developed with this, is to then work into the DNA, which I know that you also work into and have predicted the new sets of DNA and how that works. And so for me, going into understanding the actual codons genetic makeup of the human, I see that is all also musical and geometric. And so it sort of doesn't matter which discipline you start with, you inevitably start to learn all of the others. And then for me, the cosmology is the thing that I feel we need to realize is not just outside of us in the stars. It's actually all inside of us, that the genetic code is the constellations. They are the constellations, even the shapes of them and the connections of them. So it's funny because you can almost say that as you look at the stars, you're looking at the living genetic code. Mm-hmm. And so we feel they're star constellations and the mythology, but actually when you look under the microscope, it's the same thing. Whether you go look outside the telescope or through the microscope, it's the same story, same picture.
So let's go back about a year and a half when you first joined onto the research team. And the first meeting we had with you on there, I think there were maybe a couple of meetings, and you had asked me to, we were kind of going through the latest discoveries on the walls in the King's Chamber. Mm-hmm. And you asked me, what do you see on that particular wall? It was the east wall. And I said, oh, I see a woman riding on the back of a horse with a crescent moon around her body and also a bow and arrow. And she's shooting the arrow at what looks like a very large bird, like an eagle. And then you said to me, "It's like, oh wow, that's pretty remarkable." And I said, "Why?" And you said, "Well, those are all deacon that are in both Capricorn and Aquarius." Mm-hmm. And I was like, "Wait, they're all adjacent to each other, just like that?" And you were like, "Yeah, exactly." And then you said, and I remember this very well because you said, can you find in anything that looks like a fish on the wall next to the eagle? And I think, Alan had been kind of skeptical up until that moment. And then I said, yeah, I see what looks like a fish or a vesica shape above what would be our left looking at the wall, right? The right wing of the Aquila or the eagle, right above it to the left was two fish. And you said, wow, there's two fish there. I said, yeah. You said, well, that's exactly where the two fish should be. It's Piscis Austrinus.
Yeah.
And I was like, really? And then that was like too much of a chance that was a complete coincidence. And then we started looking at all the stuff on the walls. And I said, okay, I see a tree over here. Does this make sense to the mythology? And it's in the section of Gemini. You're like, well, yeah, that's the Beltran tree. And then we kept going on and on all the way around the room. And it was like perfectly matching exactly where it should be. But the orientation of the room was counterclockwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's telling us that it's precession. Mm-hmm. Because if it weren't precession, if it was procession, then the room would be clockwise. But this was actually showing up as counterclockwise. And I was like stunned at that moment because I was not an expert on the deacon of astrology. I'd heard about it before, and I'd known the Egyptian, versions of the deacon that show up on the Dendera stela, on the plate that was on the wall that now sits in the Louvre Museum in Paris. And it was on the ceiling. And I was like, wow, oh my gosh. So that's the moment that I knew, okay, this was not just like some bizarre thing that I was seeing in the walls, like some, lunatic, but actually was legit.
Yeah, I mean, that was just a crazy moment. And that was just before you went to Egypt, right, for the 12th.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think with that is something to really say with that is that if it was just looking at it through an astrological lens, then that would have probably been overlooked, because the constellations aren't necessarily like what we would expect the constellations to be nowadays. And so this is where we have to go deeper into understanding the mythology and what is the core story and principle. And so then as you're explaining it, and some of them are exactly, as you said, like the fish is like exactly there, but some of them also need us to be open to say, like, what is the story of this and how does it work? And so then the constellations...
They're more stylized. Yeah, they're more stylized.
Find. And so, yeah, and it was great because obviously I was in that process of all the deacons and writing about all of their mythologies. And so then as you're explaining it to me, like what's on the walls, I'm thinking this is like word for word, like in exactly the right places as well. It's not even like slightly off or wrong. And so even the ones, like you said, that wouldn't be in astrology per se, like the tree. But there is a tree in astrology because we have the axis points of the solstice and we have the equinox, and they often can be ascribed as trees. And so that tree that you found is the summer solstice tree. And so all of this is, as I say, we can make sense of it when we have more of a wider view of consciousness. And like you said, it's more stylized. It's not so tight in terms of it's like, oh, it doesn't look exactly the way the constellation is. And don't forget that I say to people so many times that ultimately astrologers, they connected dots. See all the dots in the star, they connected dots, and then they drew what they felt that star constellation was. And of course, in Egypt, they had the Dendera. In Babylon, they also had a version of the Dendera stone. And maybe that was even before the Dendera stone. So it's just to be open as to what the interpretations are. And then if you know the mythologies and you know our stories, and that includes fairy tales, nursery rhymes, and all of the biblical scriptures. So far, I mean, I don't know the Bible word for word, but all of the major biblical stories I can find in the stars. And so then it makes you wonder, well, was it the stars that informed us about these stories, or was it personifications of people, or is it both? Is it above and below? And so then all I can say is that it's quite miraculous that you can look into the stars and find every single biblical story and fairy tale and every story ever told.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I just kind of got something, a moment of clarity, I guess, just came in, right, in a claircognizant way, which is that the 4 mythology stories of the deacon, which are really 4 principal stories, right? It's the story of Orion and Artemis. It's the story of the 12 labors of Hercules. The next story is Jason and the Argonauts. And then we have the story of Perseus and Andromeda. And these are principally all of the deacon of astrology in the Greek and Egyptian deacon. And so I asked ChatGPT just now, I said, is it possible, see, I know you're going to love this, is it possible that the 4 mythology stories that comprise the Greek Egyptian deacon of astrology are somehow associated with the 4 North Pole position stars? Right? And its answer is, yes, it is very possible and highly likely, right? And the deacons are metaphorically and archetypally linked to the 4 North Pole position stars, especially when considering the great year processional and its influence on ancient cosmologies. The 4 pole stars over the great year, the Earth's axial precession causes the position of the North Pole to trace a circular path over its 26,000-year cycle, pointing out different stars at different times. The major stars that have served or will serve as the pole stars include Thuban, right, Polaris, Vega, and Deneb. Some traditions also highlight Alderamin, which is Alpha Cephei in the cycle. That's another one. These stars form a cross-like structure in the northern sky over the great year, symbolically echoing the tetramorph in Christian iconography and the 4 living creatures of the zodiac: Leo, Taurus, so the man, the lion, the bull, and the eagle. Sound familiar? Same as the Ark of the Covenant. The 4 decanic myths in Greco-Egyptian astrology is really just tying back to Osiris and Isis, Horus versus Set, Persephone and Hades, Prometheus. We could group these into archetypes that mirror the 4 polar positions, right? So you've got the mythic story of Osiris and Isis and death, and the archetype is the water, Scorpio, eagle, transformation and mystery, and that's associated with a Thuban pole star, right, at north and northeast. And then the Horus Set, conflict and balance, which is air and Aquarius, and man, mind, and conflict and duality. That's going to be more related to Ursa Minor, right, which is Polaris. Persephone and Hades, descent and return, also related to Polaris. And then Prometheus, fire, sacrifice, and enlightenment, is related to Vega. Now, does any of this make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's for sure. I mean, the 4 quarters, right? It's the grand fixed cross is the Taurus, Scorpio, and the Leo, Aquarius. And that's also where we have the 4 royal stars of Persia, which Piscis Austrinus is one of them. And so that's one of the most profound crosses, I would say, that a lot of the mythologies come from, for sure. And just to say as well that often these myths are actually going backwards through the procession. So when we look at the night sky, we have this sort of, we think, well, how does that work? Because it feels like it's going backwards. And most of the myths are actually all about the backwards precession. And so it's from a cosmic viewpoint. So I always say to people, if you think about this, that the seasons and all of that, it's that processional cycle. Normally, all of the myths are from a cosmic lens, as if you're sort of the eyes in space looking down at Earth. And so you're seeing it in a reverse order. And so, yeah, this is where it's so great. And I would say everything can kind of be boiled down to the idea of Osiris and Isis and Horus and Set. And so Horus is the sunrise, right, the horizon, and then Set is sunset. And so we have that, and then we have the divine masculine and feminine journey through that. So again, it's pointing out this idea of the equinox points and solstice points. And so a lot of the myths are like orientations for us to feel the 4 corners of the earth. And the circumpolar stars, which is the ones you're speaking about, there are about 7, maybe even 9 of them. And of course, this is kind of interesting because depending on if the Earth stayed in its axis of the 23.4 degrees, or was the Earth at a different axis point previously. And a lot of these constellations as well are sort of sometimes overlooked. Like I just spoke about in my latest work was about the camel, right? And you'll like this one because the story of the camels, it's in a lot of our mythology. And of course, one of the most prevalent ones is the story of the birth of Christ, that the 3 kings of Orion, the Magi kings, came in riding camels. Well, when you look at in the winter solstice, you'll see the summer stars. And in the heavens, you'll literally see Orion rising, and then you'll see it looks like Orion is riding the back of the camel. And so it looks like the 3 kings are riding on a camel. And so this is where it's so beautiful that they're working mirrors, that often when we're in the winter, we're seeing the summer stars rising and vice versa. And so often it can be a bit confusing because we're like, well, it should be here in the Dendera stone, but we don't see that star until we're in its counter opposite. And so, yeah, all of this stuff like the Christmas tree, why is there this idea of the Christmas tree, and what is the Star of Bethlehem? Well, at the winter solstice, when you look directly opposite, you'll see the tip of the tree, if the roots are in Capricorn, going up towards Cancer, you'll actually see that at the tip of the tree, you have Sirius.
Yep.
And so Sirius would be, to them, would be on top of the Christmas tree, would be the star of Bethlehem. So that's to say, everything, when you know the stars and you know this orientation, all the myths, I think they make them even more profound. They're not just sort of in the mind, it's actually happening every year for us to embody and work with. And that's why I say some of the Christ stories are just so magical that we can find with all these profound solstice and equinox lines.
So, okay. So let's go back for just a moment then, and maybe you can kind of walk us through some of your work and what you found, and then how that's applied to, the King's Chamber stuff. And then also we could probably go into the recent work on the Ark of the Covenant. And then I know you've got kind of an announcement related to your work that might be associated with the Sphinx in particular. And so I think it'll just basically naturally evolve from there. But I did want to say that that this whole discussion about the great year and how the great year is associated, I think is fascinating, because what chat is basically saying is that Thuban is associated with the fallen Titan Atlantean archetype, which is Orion. It says that Jason is associated with Polaris, which is the wandering seeker, collective quest. And then Hercules' story is ascended, master, and soul completion. And whereas Deneb is associated with the avenger, hero, restorer of Perseus.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of there. I think, like, with my work with the deacons, it really hones in on the degrees and the exact points in the wheel where the stories are. Like, for example, we could say that, Jason and the Argonauts, such an amazing story, as you say, because it involves so many other constellations. And so this idea of the journey on the Ark, right? And so we find Argo Navis, which is the ship, which is Noah's Ark. It's the same ark in the wheel. And so Jason and the Argonauts is that he's on this ship, which is in Cancer, one of the deacons in Cancer. And so he sails literally around the whole wheel, collecting all these other passengers and moving through. And then where is he actually going? He's going to seek the Golden Fleece. And so you think, well, what is the Golden Fleece? Well, where it's actually moving in that processional cycle, we find that Aries, being the lamb or the sheep, is the Golden Fleece. And why is it golden? Why is there gold there? Because the sun exalts in Aries, which basically means that the sun is happiest in Aries. It's its favorite place within the wheel, apart from its own place in Leo. So when you know, like, the layers and layers and layers of astrology, then you can see why that would make sense. A golden fleece, where it's a lamb and it's the sun. And so this is that was the journey into the age of Aries. So it was a story that encapsulated all of the signs as if they're all on the ark moving into the age of Aries. And so the same thing with Moses was the story of moving from the age of Taurus to Aries. And we know that the Christ stories are from Aries to Pisces. And so it's so great. And we're in that process now of what is going to be the myths that are going to be for us to move from Pisces to Aquarius. And this is where we can start to see the symbols of Aquarius. Like we had the fish and the fisher of men and the fisher king and all of this stuff in the Pisces. But now the symbols for Aquarius are going to be about the white wings. So you were speaking about the Vitruvian man gaining his angelic white wings. Right. That literally it's about the human. Aquarius about the human man, or the angelic human man. And it's about us developing our white wings, because we have Cygnus, which is the swan, which can be seen as the white and the black swan. And then you have Pegasus, which is the winged horse, right? Or the winged unicorn. And so those are our main, what we are moving into. And so we all see this in people's logos, in society. We'll start seeing Pegasus written everywhere. We'll start seeing the swan everywhere. And this is where we're actually in the time of creating the new myths that thousands of years in the future, they'll be looking back at this and saying,
totally.
like, oh, that was all of the myth of Aquarius.
Yeah, absolutely. So how does that work then? So when you first learned about that the deacon of astrology was on the walls inside the Great Pyramid, and I can actually show something here that I think will help to contextualize this.
The first discovery that we made along the north wall of the King's Chamber.
Can you hear this okay?
Yeah.
Is the Apis bull, which is exactly a reference to the Alpha or Aleph, as it's referred to, which means bull. And as we look at this bull, we can recognize that the bull has a diamond-shaped figure over its heart, and another that seems to be inverted beneath it. The bull also has characteristics where we can see its horns, and it seems to take on a look that's similar to some of the cave paintings that are found in France that date all the way back to many tens of thousands of years. We'll also notice that around the bull is a larger cow, possibly a reference to the Hathor, the mother of the Apis bull. In the mythology, the Apis bull has to sacrifice himself to subsume and be subsumed back into the mother Hathor by and through the death of his egoic experience and mind. As we look around the room, we also notice that on the west wall of the King's Chamber, we see the face of a lion. And also on the south wall, immediately across from where we find the Apis bull and the Hathor, we can also see a scorpion, as well as a snake and a man. This man representation we find is actually a representation etched into the stone of what is often referred to as the 13th zodiac sign of Ophiuchus. Ophiuchus, Asclepion, even Thoth. As we look at the east wall across from the sarcophagus, we can see the outline of a woman riding a winged horse. The winged horse is a representation of Pegasus. The woman, the representation of Delphinus. And additionally, she's shooting a bow and arrow, and the bow and arrow representing Sagitta. The arrow pointed directly to, with a prominent arrowhead being very visible, the Aquila, a large eagle or thunderbird. These we might recognize are all astronomical constellations representing Capricorn. We can now see that all of the 12 zodiac signs are represented with all of the walls in precisely the correct locations. The deacon of astrology are 36 different astronomical constellations that fit within each zodiac sign, including the Orion constellation, also become visible to us and to our perspective. As we go around the room and we notice that all of the 48 in total constellations at the time of Ptolemy are represented, and that the deacon of astrology are in fact the calendrical deacon that were represented in the Atlantean calendar. It starts to raise significant questions as to what the purpose of this room actually is.
So, what would you say, now that you've spent a significant amount of time studying this, what would you say the purpose of the room actually might be?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any question really that it's a Stargate of consciousness. And I think you're right with this idea that I think the mind or whatever happened in that chamber, there was a projection of the constellations either from the being into those walls, or however, or those walls had them inscribed, like you said, in crystal or some kind of formation. But the chances of everything, it's not just one piece of the puzzle that fits. Anywhere we look on those walls, and we're still finding new stuff that matches, that it's way too perfect. And it's even perfect down to the point where you enter the king's chamber, you enter it at the spring equinox in Aries. So you literally start the astrological year as you walk in the room. And then, as we found out, that then as you stand and look at where the sarcophagus is, you're standing from the position of where we are in time right now. We're standing in the age of Aquarius. And so that's our view of the king's chamber. And so these things aren't happening by chance. It's literally I feel like I said to you before, that as you walk up that grand gallery, when I heard about that, it's like, well, what is the grand gallery? Right? The grand gallery is the stars, right? That is God's grand gallery. So walking into, yes, it's a chamber, but you're walking into the stars. And then I feel that king's chamber is the orientation of how to align yourself with the stars. And so that's why I agree with you about moving the sarcophagus into the center point to create this sort of hypercube energy, and that where you stand, where you lay, is all part of us being able to project our consciousness through to connect with that star wisdom. And, you know, who knows at that level of consciousness back then, what that may mean, whether that is that idea where you can take the ankh of life and you open those portals, and then you can literally be in different dimensions or connecting with other star beings. But it might sound all quite sort of out there, but the fact that your drawings that you drew with just the purity of like, this is what I see. And then, so then when I came in to see that what you'd drawn, it made perfect sense to me. I could read it the same as I could read an astrological map. There was no difference. So I think that's where you didn't have an agenda to draw it, to try and make it fit. You know, it was just that you drew them, and then someone else came along and said like, hey, we need to look at this. I think it makes sense. And so that's why I think it's powerful when we can collaborate with other people, different disciplines, and then we start to piece this all together. And then now look what we have. We have this true, beautiful map. And now we're trying to understand what that means.
Yeah, and what we're also finding now is it's not just the illustration depictions of these mythos stories, but it's also the stars themselves are etched into the walls, which is fascinating, right? That in and of itself is like a powerful totem for us maybe to remember by. But, you know, I know you've had your own journey as well, in that in the beginning, were you able to see these images on the walls like I could, or is that something you developed with time?
No, that was, to be honest, that was just from you saying it was there. Like, I think it's that thing, right? Because if we don't know, we don't know. So we're kind of like in the blissful not knowing. And so we just take it as it is. But I think with geometry, then as soon as I realized there was something there, then you go into the same, I don't know how to explain it, the same mode as you do when you're lost in geometry. You kind of see patterns within patterns. It's like you have different vision switches on. And so if you apply that to the walls, and it was only recently really that I viewed it in the Da Vinci painting, because again, you said there was images on the walls in there. And so then as I was just scanning through with the knowing that there is going to be something there, all of a sudden the shapes started to pop out. And it's so strange because as soon as one comes, it's like you've attuned yourself. And then I can see now why the more times you've gone back to the King's Chamber, they are just beaming at you. So blatantly obvious. And so I think it takes a bit of a, if you're a bit of a belief of like, you're not going, there is things there. And I think, if you have good pattern recognition, or even something like, when you see silhouettes, like there's that negative space and then positive space. I think if you view that these drawings are a bit like that there's sort of negative and positive space, then you can start to see them. And I would say they're very, very clear. Once you find one, you'll start seeing many, and then I feel that affects your whole life. Like you start to see things in things that you never saw before. And so you could be looking at a tree. The other day I was just looking at this tree in the wind, and I'm seeing a whole mythology playing out. And I'm thinking like, wow. So I think it's like how energy's talking, right? You were saying a number in space time. I think that in that moment of observing the tree and how it was moving, it was encoding that message for me at that particular time. And it was a really profound message that I needed for my work. So I feel like it's becoming more synchronistic. It's kind of mind-blowing when it starts happening like that. But
wow. So what was it for you though that like got you to the point where you were comfortable to say, this is what this is? And you when you started matching the things as well, like I think you saw Sirius or the dog star represented on one of the walls in the Last Supper painting, and you sent me the picture of the same segment, and I said, I see a dog right there, and then you pointed out to me that I had drawn a dog's head on the wall in the King's Chamber on the north wall in the exact spot that you would expect that Sirius to be in.
That's what I mean. I'm very thorough, like with, and this is what was funny because Alan Green, he takes a lot of convincing about these things, and I'm very thorough with the degrees and where it is and how it aligns, because otherwise, it could just be random things. So the more I checked out where the walls were, the placements were, and the deacons and how it all aligns, that's why I say like it literally is that to the degree and to the wall. And so when I was looking at that particular part of the wall, which is the northwest part of the wall, where near the tree of life, the solstice, and I knew there would be a dog there, right? Because you've got Sirius and we've also got Canis Minor. And so I thought, just to double check that how this would be seen, I saw it in your drawing. It's exactly there in the stars. And then I thought I would triple check and see if I could find it in the Last Supper painting. And lo and behold, there it is popping out. I'd never seen it before in the Last Supper, and it's in exactly the right place. And so I'm thinking, it feels like the King's Chamber, Da Vinci Code, and the Astrology, you can kind of triple check these things, and they're all bringing the same story. So that's what started to really, it becomes unquestionable now. And I just enjoy the fact that I know if there's a horse or a fish there, I know somewhere it's going to pop out and at some time. And everything that you've drawn in the King's Chamber, it all makes sense exactly where it is in the zodiac.
Yeah, here's an example of one such drawing, right? It's not really a drawing, it's from the wall itself. Now, mind you, there should be no linear lines on this wall, right? And you could definitely see the linear line of the both sides of the diamond shape. And then you can even see the inverted diamond line right here as well. Right, that's making exactly the shape. And you can see the bull and the eye right here and its horns. And you got to know that this wall is very old and that it has been greatly damaged as well on the surface. But this is etched in the molecular structure. That's why even though the surface has been scrubbed probably 1,000+ times and with heavy abrasive materials as well as solvents, the images are still there. And once you see them, you can't really unsee them. Yeah. That's kind of the thing about this.
Yeah. And of course, you were saying about the bull being slain. And so that's obviously the Mithras story. you know. And so this is why I say that we can, if we're skeptical, then it's like, okay, that's really good, because actually that means we get to go deeper. And often the deeper that we go, the more it ends up confirming what we thought anyway. And so that's why you can check in the myth, you can check in the astrology, you can check on the wall, you can check in the Last Supper. And so through all of these things, you find the connections. And so that's what makes it kind of, yeah, you don't question it anymore, just enjoy the revelation.
Yeah. And here's another example, right? So we can see the Last Supper here. And in the Last Supper painting, you can see on the right wall right here is a cow. And I'm just tracing around its head. That's the eye of the cow right here, the nostrils. Here's the ridge of its back. You can see this ridge line in the white section. And then it goes around like this. And then it says Alpha QW written in the wall. And then there's a bull right here. You can see a Taurus symbol literally on the middle of the forehead of the bull. And you can see one eye right here, the other eye right here, and its horns going up right here on both sides. And the two nostrils right here as well. And it looks like a little baby bull. And it's in the exact same position as you would expect it to be, because it's right next to where the entrance point is. And you've got the north wall of the king's chamber here. This is the west wall. And then the south wall, which is dark, it's supposed to represent the feminine. And this is the light representing the masculine. It's all encrypted. And here is a sarcophagus. I mean, what a trip. Like, wow. Here's the world's most famous painting, arguably, right? And so that's amazing. That's literally incredible. And that we can see this and have it be presented to us this way is just mind-blowing, because that became the means or the cipher for me to know if the thing was there or not. Because we started first seeing it in the Last Supper painting, these items and these petroglyphs on the walls. And then from there, we could confirm their existence on the walls inside the Great Pyramid. And they were in the exact same positions, which is just, wow. What a trip.
Yeah, I think
so.
I think the discovery of saying that the Last Supper is the King's Chamber is huge, because then there's two different versions for us to look at. And like you said, when you find one in one, you can look for it in the other. And so far, through what I've found, is that they are reflecting the same story. And with Da Vinci's work, he's encoding all of the disciples there as astrological signs as well. So it is this story of the stars and the King's Chamber in this Last Supper painting.
Yeah, and you can see it right here. This is on the east wall. There's even the word Thoth etched into the wall right here. Mm-hmm. See the O right here and the TH, and then the number 126 also written into the wall. You can see where the arrowhead, that was kind of the first thing that you could really point out pretty simply.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If we go back, you'll see this.
Well,
you see the arrowhead right there.
Well, what was interesting is that was the first image that you showed me, and we were actually in the Capricorn, Sagittarius Capricorn energy at the time of this discovery. So Sagittarius was literally on the tip of the tongue as we were discovering it. So when you're saying there's an arrow, and then it's right there, that is the pointing to the winter solstice. It's exactly there. So yeah, pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, truly amazing. And then here you've got the Aquila, and its long wings and its talons right here.
Yep.
And despite having been scrubbed so many times, and this is when you said, well, okay, if this is true, then we would expect to see some sort of fish in the, right above the wing on the left side. And see, these are the deacon right here. in Capricorn. So the Sagitta, the Aquila, and Delphinus are all in Capricorn, and in Aquarius is the Pegasus that she's riding on.
Yeah. And Pisces.
But then you said that there should be a fish right here, and you can't see all of it because it's cut off by the screen, but there, you can see the fish and the fish tail right here.
Yeah.
And there's a second fish there as well. And that is the Piscis Austrinus, right at this point, right? Where it says Piscis Austrinus right behind this little thing.
And you know what's interesting is that it even makes sense to the orientation of the four corners of the room. That's the thing that's baffling, because as you enter the king's chamber, that's Aries, that's your spring equinox. And then diagonally, if you go through the center, then in the opposite corner you're looking at is Libra, the autumn equinox. And then as you look to the right, then that's the summer solstice. And when you look to the left is the winter solstice. So the X, the chi of the room is literally the equinoxes and the solstices. So that's why I say, like, it's not even slightly off, or we're having to try and make sense of it. It's all written there. And even the lion being right there on the back wall there, that's exactly the face of Leo, exactly straight in the place where it would be. So, yeah, I think the whole idea of this, like, apart from being like, wow and great, this is how fun is this? I think that it's trying to show us that they revered the stars, and the star wisdom was so important to our evolution, to the mythology is our story. And so we get to play out those mythologies, and we also get to see that if we choose those options that say they have in the mythology, that we know the result. So if the hero chooses, like you were saying about Orion, if the hero chooses a certain way, and then we see the repercussions of that. And so we get to navigate our life through our own natal chart, through our communion with the stars, so that when we can live out this mythology in the highest way. So that, I think, brings it into the tangible of, like, this is all trying to show you the stories of your own self.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's the kind of the power of this whole story, right? Is that it's giving us all this metaphor, deep metaphor, that is so, I don't know, so vitally important for us to somehow comprehend and grok. And to me, it's telling this story right here. This is the story that we're going through this long cycle of Earth, and that there's more about time that we didn't realize, and that cyclicality and seasonality is replicated, right, across these four North Stars, which are also going to be directly tied to, the vernal equinox, the summer and winter solstice, and it's going to be directly tied as well to the fixed signs in the zodiac, right, as well as the autumnal equinox. So, and that's what we've just basically passed through in the long cycle, right, going through the vernal equinox. So to me, this is like, damn, it's literally a clock.
Yeah. And that's what I think is so great, that you can start to see, like, potentially when the pyramids were built, or when these imprints were placed on the walls, and what that aligns to. And so it could easily, from this, we could easily say it's 13,000 years ago, if not a whole entire precessional cycle more. And so then I think now that expands this idea of our known history into that era of, well, it makes it kind of realistic that something like Atlantis was there, or is there, or that is a remnant of that era. And so again, it's so great to find these images on the walls, because then we can start to see what was the stars, what was happening in the stars at that time, and how it aligns. And so we can get a feel of the clock, where we are in this great cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. So, that's another aspect of this that I think is so interesting And I'll just show this real quick as well.
The deacon of astrology are 36 different astronomical constellations that fit within each zodiac sign, including the Orion constellation, also become visible to us and to our perspective. As we go around the room and we notice that all of the 48 in total constellations at the time of Ptolemy are represented, and that the deacon of astrology are in fact the calendrical deacon that were represented in the Atlantean calendar. It starts to raise significant questions as to what the purpose of this room actually is. Why also does it take on this 2-to-1 rectangular form? One of the possible answers to this question might be that as we traverse through our 24,000 year precession of equinox, our North Star position changes from star to star every 6,000 years approximately. Currently, it's Polaris. Polaris is in the constellation of Ursa Minor. But 6,000 years ago, it was in Thuban. And Thuban was our North Star. Thuban is part of the Dracos constellation. But 6,000 years before that, or approximately 12,000 years ago, it was Vega. And then finally, Cygnus constellation, housing within it the star Deneb, which would have been our North Star 24,000 years ago. As we look into the night sky, we'll notice that all four of those stars together take the orientation of a 2-to-1 rectangle matching that of the King's Chamber. We'll also note that the original position of the sarcophagus, we strongly believe to have been the center of this room and structure, because even the Orion constellation itself takes on the same 2-to-1 rectangular form and shape, with the 3 belt stars exactly being framed by the proportional structure of the sarcophagus.
So, that's an interesting thing, because I think what you just said was that you felt that the primary story was really the story of Osiris, right? Mm-hmm. And that this primary story is probably just being morphed into the different stories like Jason the Argonauts, as well as Hercules. We already know there's a lot of ties between Hercules and Orion stories, right? And Enkidu, as well as, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is really telling the same stories as well, right? So is this really just the different incarnations of Orion or Osiris into these different hero lifetimes? And then the legend and myth that comes off of that is just a different name that's associated with the different season within the precession of that incarnation. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I always smile and say it's the same guy. It's the same guy. Imagine if you could record all of your past lives and then all of your journeys that you've had and where you were born in different countries and put them all together. Imagine that as like a whole star map. That's really what we're looking at. You could say it's the same consciousness, as you said, like having different iterations, different challenges, different times, different star alignments. And with that, Isis, and of course, they're all of the Greek myths, all of the biblical stories, they're just renamed different beings. Like we were saying about Mithras, Horus, it's like, it's all the same essence. And I think that's the thing to realize. And then you realize that, hold on a minute, that is me also. That's what I know to be played out through the stars is also my journey. That is me. We are Orion. We are that human going through the journey, and Isis combined. So yeah, the Hercules story is, I would say, perhaps one of the most profound stories that anybody could ever move into. And I linked all of the labors to the different astrological signs. And so you're literally seeing like Hercules going through each sign, completing each labor. And then I found the missing 13th labor. And and so the missing 13th labor, it's really subtle, right? Because it's at the very end of the story, and it's so subtle that we would miss it. And so we know that Hera essentially seems like his adversary, that she's put him in these difficult...
Yeah, because she was jealous of Zeus and having the affair that created, Hercules in the first place. So she has been the nemesis throughout all of the stories, right? But you're right. I did notice something about that. It's almost like she's helping him become ascended.
Yeah, she's exactly that. And so I always say that because his name's Heracles, which means the glory of Hera. So she is like his...
So she was the first tough love mom.
Yeah.
First tiger mom.
Yeah, she's like his, you could say he's like his anima, right? So she's the one that's creating the trials because he wants to become immortal.
Epic.
So in order for him to become immortal, he needs these challenges. So she's actually helping him, although it appears that she's creating the disharmony. And I don't know if you noticed, but Eve is actually can be translated as beneficial adversary. And that's really interesting because Hera takes on that role as the beneficial adversary. So she appears as the adversary. And so in the last labor, where he kills the centaur, and then the centaur's blood has the poison from the Hydra, and then his wife gives him this cloak to wear, and then his skin starts to burn, and then he puts himself onto a funeral pyre, and he actually burns himself. That's the hidden 13th, because it was his wife that stored the poison, that in order for him to actually ascend, it's the feminine again that gives him the poison that is his potion.
Yeah, this was the poison from the Hydra, right? This was and then he ends up getting shot with the arrow with the poison.
No, she dips his...
that's right. She
dips his cloak.
That's right. She ended up dipping his cloak or something in it, which then killed him, right?
Yeah, and so as a celebration, she gifted him, right? So she didn't know what this poison was. So she dipped a robe in poison, which she didn't know it was poison. She handed him the robe as a celebration, as a gift. And then he put it on. As soon as he put it on, his whole skin started to burn. And it was so painful. He built himself his own funeral pyre and threw himself on it to burn himself alive. And so that was the final one. It's the feminine giving the gift. Although it was the pain, it got him to immortality. And so this is why I say, like, these stories run so deep that often we see that there's an adversary or there's a challenge, and why is this happening to me? But if you're meant to move into that immortal self, then the challenge is going to be significant to allow you to recognize that.
Yeah. You know what? It's interesting. Also, when I was doing my research, I found that one of the mythologies associated, one of the stories associated with Orion was that Orion had the ability to walk on water because he was the son of Poseidon, right? And as a result of being the son of Poseidon, he had this ability to walk on water. And of course, where else do we hear that story? It's the same story of Jesus, right? And in particular, that became important because this was in the ushering in of the Pisceon, the age of Pisces, and where Jesus was the fisherman of men. And I saw this video. You may have seen this. I'm not sure if you've seen it or not, but I definitely wanted to share this as well and get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, and just sharing about...
Go ahead.
Yeah, just sharing about the sun is so interesting because we could just respell that S-U-N, right? So
yeah, totally.
And so when we have these stories of, the son of, then often it's the S-U-N. And so, yeah, in the summer solstice, where we have this moment of inertia as the sun raises to its highest peak, and then we move into Cancer, and Cancer, the crab that moves sideways. So the sun, as it goes up, instead of going up and down, it actually for 3 days of the summer solstice, it appears to go sideways, and that is where the sun is walking on the ocean, walking on water. And so it's so beautiful. And so, yeah, and this is why Horus, the same thing, it's the sun that can walk on water. So, yeah, it's so great when you tie it all together.
So check this out. I don't know if you've seen this video, but it's quite good.
This is the sun. As far back as 10,000 BC, history is abundant with carvings and writings reflecting people's respect and adoration for this object. And it is simple to understand why, as every morning the sun would rise, bringing vision, warmth, and security, saving man from the cold, blind, predator-filled darkness of night. Without it, the cultures understood the crops would not grow and life on the planet would not survive. These realities made the sun the most adorned object of all time. Likewise, they were also very aware of the stars. The tracking of the stars allowed them to recognize and anticipate events which occurred over long periods of time, such as eclipses and full moons. They in turn cataloged celestial groups into what we know today as constellations. This is the cross of the zodiac, one of the oldest conceptual images in human history. It reflects the sun as it figuratively passes through the 12 major constellations over the course of a year. It also reflects the 12 months of the year, the 4 seasons, and the solstices and equinoxes. The term zodiac relates to the fact that constellations were anthropomorphized or personified as figures or animals. In other words, the early civilizations did not just follow the sun and stars, they personified them with elaborate myths involving their movements and relationships. The sun, with its life-giving and saving qualities, was personified as a representative of the unseen creator or God, God's son, the light of the world, the savior of humankind. Likewise, the 12 constellations represented places of travel for God's son, and were identified by names, usually representing elements of nature that happened during that period of time. For example, Aquarius, the water bearer, who brings the spring rains. This is Horus. He is the sun god of Egypt of around 3000 BC. He is the sun anthropomorphized, and his life is a series of allegorical myths involving the sun's movement in the sky. From the ancient hieroglyphics in Egypt, we know much about this solar messiah. For instance, Horus, being the sun or the light, had an enemy known as Set, and Set was the personification of the darkness or night. And, metaphorically speaking, every morning Horus would win the battle against Set, while in the evening Set would conquer Horus and send him into the underworld. It is important to note that dark versus light, or good versus evil, is one of the most ubiquitous mythological dualities ever known, and is still expressed on many levels to this day. Broadly speaking, the story of Horus is as follows. Horus was born on December 25th of the Virgin Isis Mary. His birth was accompanied by a star in the east, which, in turn, 3 kings followed to locate and adorn the newborn savior. At the age of 12, he was a prodigal child teacher. At the age of 30, he was baptized by a figure known as Anubis, and thus began his ministry. Horus had 12 disciples he traveled about with, performing miracles such as healing the sick and walking on water. Horus was known by many gestural names such as the Truth, the Light, God's Anointed Son, the Good Shepherd, the Lamb of God, and many others. After being betrayed by Typhon, Horus was crucified, buried for 3 days, and thus resurrected. These attributes of Horus, whether original or not, seem to permeate many cultures of the world, for many other gods are found to have the same general mythological structure. Attis of Phrygia, born of the Virgin Nana on December 25th, crucified, placed in a tomb, and after 3 days was resurrected. Krishna of India, born of the Virgin Devaki, with a star in the east signaling his coming. He performed miracles with his disciples, and, upon his death, was resurrected. Dionysus of Greece, born of a virgin on December 25th, was a traveling teacher who performed miracles such as turning water into wine. He was referred to as the King of Kings, God's only begotten Son, the Alpha and Omega, and many others. And, upon his death, he was resurrected. Mithra of Persia, born of a virgin on December 25th. He had 12 disciples and performed miracles, and upon his death was buried for 3 days and thus resurrected. He was also referred to as the truth, the light, and many others. Interestingly, the sacred day of worship of Mithra was Sunday. The fact of the matter is, there are numerous saviors from different periods from all over the world which subscribe to these general characteristics. The question remains, why these attributes? Why the virgin birth on December 25th? Why dead for 3 days in the inevitable resurrection? Why 12 disciples or followers? To find out, let's examine the most recent of the solar messiahs. Jesus Christ was born of the Virgin Mary on December 25th in Bethlehem. His birth was announced by a star in the east, which 3 kings or magi followed to locate and adorn the new Savior. He was a child teacher at 12. At the age of 30, he was baptized by John the Baptist, and thus began his ministry. Jesus had 12 disciples, which he traveled about with, performing miracles such as healing the sick, walking on water, raising the dead. He was also known as the King of Kings, the Son of God, the Light of the World, the Alpha and Omega, the Lamb of God, and many, many others. After being betrayed by his disciple Judas and sold for 30 pieces of silver, he was crucified, placed in a tomb, and after 3 days was resurrected and ascended into heaven. First of all, the birth sequence is completely astrological. The star in the east is Sirius.
Okay. Have you seen that before?
Yes, I have. Yeah. Yeah. And this is why I say that, when you know the stars and you know the seasons, then you understand, like, when is the actual resurrection? When is the crucifixion? When does that actually take place? Because it happens every single year. And so as we're approaching Easter, what I found with the deacons is that you would think, well, as the sun passes into this idea of the crucifixion, right? And so the resurrection is Aries, but at the same time, opposite in the zodiac, in Libra, there is a crucifix in the stars. So there is a where the sun gets crucified, but it also is resurrected. And so that's that equinox line of Aries and Libra. And even more into detail than that is that the crucifix represents what they call the 5 wounds of Christ. And what I found was the star law of Aries is where we have Athena, and Athena carries the spear. And so the 5th wound of Christ is where the spear of the equinox from Aries pierces the side of Libra. So this idea of all of these wounds of Christ are all astrological also. And so this is the movement of the sun going through the zodiac, is this idea of the death, going in the tomb for 3 days. That's the solstices, where you're in 72 hours each side on the winter and the summer solstice. And then the sun is reborn on Christmas Day. It's resurrected. And so when you know the cycles of the sun, the moon, the stars, then all of this mythology, that's why I say I feel like it brings it more to life. Whereas it was probably the star law was suppressed, and it was more about people and the personification. But I think this is actually going to be a great way for people to see that the stars and the mythology and potentially the personification are really all one. And I think that will help bring a lot of people more into myths and their importance and the telling of stories. That is our greatest teacher for all of humanity.
So basically what you're saying then, if this is correct, is that the foundational basis of all of the mythology of every major Western, and to a certain extent linked through their own archetype versions, Eastern, both philosophical and religious associations are all tied back to the monomyth of Osiris.
Yeah, in his many forms.
And it's essentially, and Horus is simply the first incarnation of Osiris. So, and the story is him getting reincarnated over and over and over again and living out these same cycles in order to finally learn how to transcend the duat and escape or transcend out of this dualistic world into the next iteration, whatever that is, through resurrection.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely, you could even incorporate its opposite, right? Because we know in astrology, it's always to do with its partner. And so we could say that the whole story, the mythos, is Orion, Osiris, but it's also Orpheochus or Sophia. And so, which is the same as this Isis-Osiris link. So it's our inner masculine, inner feminine.
Shiva and Shakti.
Yeah. And so it's really that whole journey, as you say, over and over. But there has been no story, even modern day movies and modern day fairy tales that we see, I haven't seen or found anything that I can't find in the stars. It's all there. And so it just depends on what we want to emphasize, what times we're in, and what makes sense to the people. As you say, the constellations also changed what they were. So to the Native Americans, they would use the animals that they could see on the land, and they would use them as the constellations. And the same in Australia, that they have the emu constellation. Well, we don't have that in the West, but it's the same. It's just different constellations rebranded through their present moment environment, and also the gods and the goddesses. So it just depends on where you are in the world, but it's all using the stars to share these truths, these stories.
So, okay, so this is almost exactly the way then that we both landed on this idea that there must be an astrological constellation associated with the Ark of the Covenant.
Mm-hmm. Well,
right.
Yeah.
So this is only about a week or so ago.
Mm-hmm.
I got this, very powerful, claircognizant download that there was a constellation associated with the Ark of the Covenant.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started going on the hunt for it. Actually, I was trying to understand this notion of the Rudra and the Rudra Granthi, and basically the combination of the masculine, the gold in alchemy, and the feminine, which is the moon, and the masculine being the sun and gold, and the moon being silver. And together they form this electrum. And so they have to have a furnace to heat them up to the temperatures of melting point for both gold, which is 1947 degrees, which is a very important number as well, related to the position of a tetrahedron within a sphere and its nesting points at the points of the tetrahedron. So here would be the tetrahedron. Imagine this tetrahedron being surrounded by a sphere. These points here would be at 19.47 degrees, right, around this. And so we have sacred sites that are also around the world that are associated with that. Like, this is where you find Teotihuacan, for example. So the point being that I felt that that temperature relationship needed a furnace to somehow create the electrum, and the temperature of silver needs to be heated up to 1764 degrees versus the 1947 for gold, and that the electrum was this white gold that would come and be accompanied by the crown chakra activation, because you have a white halo that comes as a result, and the rainbow body activation is fully in place. So I also, this happened to be the exact same time that the U.S. CIA was just releasing, under Freedom of Information Act, their information related to the Ark of the Covenant. And that was just a bizarre coincidence, as if there's a such thing, right? So this is exactly, the CIA secret files claim the Ark of the Covenant has been found, right? And so I started looking for, what this might be relative to. And I found that this furnace is in the southern hemisphere. And the furnace looked a lot like an Ark of the Covenant. So then I started looking at the proportions of it, because it's famously 2.5 biblical cubits by 1.5 biblical cubits. So that would be about 27 inches by 44 inches. And that looks about right versus the, size of this man here. And so it would definitely fit inside the sarcophagus. And this is a replica that was at Mar-a-Lago for the last couple of years. I've now since heard that it might be going, or might already be back now in Israel. But this replica was made for an event and then got stuck there in Mar-a-Lago since 2019. So this is a full-on replica of the Ark of the Covenant, made of acacia wood, matching all the biblical, Torah specifications. Now, Fornax sits under the plane of the ecliptic. So it doesn't show up in the northern hemisphere very much at all, unless you're pretty close to the equator. And so Fornax does show up in the night sky between November and April if you're in Egypt, if you're in southern Egypt. And what's interesting is the proportions. This is seen as a perspective drawing. It looks three-dimensional, like it's coming out at you, because it's made in perspective. Whoever put it together with these stars, it's definitely making it look like it's in perspective. So this point is closer than this point, for example. And so this becomes a 2.5 to 1.5 proportion as well in perspective, which was kind of bizarre. So this is what the actual proportion of the Ark of the Covenant would look like. And then it's sort of matching the look and feel of both of these boxes. It's kind of like a stout box, I suppose, of a rectangular shape. And this is the way they depict it, as this furnace. And it's this alchemical furnace, again, used to merge and meld together alloys that need to get to high melting points. So again, in southern Egypt at 22 and 25 degrees, you can see it in the night sky. And, this is actually one that I have, a replica that I have in my house. I have it next to my tree of life, which is funny because I didn't plan that either. So the tree looks like it's coming out of the box. I bought this at the Knights Templar store in Portugal, in Tomar. And it's had some sort of significance to me. So then this is the drawing. You said, hey, wait a minute, this might also be matching the sarcophagus with the other stars. And then I started putting it together and figured out that it looks like there's like wings coming out of the top of it as well. And I started remembering, well, wait, maybe they're not wings. It could also be a tree growing out of it. And that's part of the exact story of Osiris when he's killed by his brother Set, is that the casket is sent down the river. It ends up in Lebanon, in Byblos. And the king of Byblos, lets Isis get the body of her husband out, but it ends up there, and a tree is growing out of it. And the sarcophagus, strangely, in its current position, is actually next to a tree on the north wall. But then I had also noticed, because you pointed out to me, that maybe this gamma, which is kind of funny because this is actually the shape of gamma as well. The Y shape is the shape of gamma, and that's the star, right? So, okay, gamma superscript 2, and it's making the shape of a sarcophagus as well, which many believe that the Ark of the Covenant was originally inside the sarcophagus. After all, it shares the face of the 4 faces, right, of the cherubim, which is the face of the lion, the face of the man, the face of the ox, and the face of the eagle, all of which represent walls in the king's chamber. So this is the tree potentially growing out of it. And this is a drawing that I had drawn 4 years ago in a channeling. And it was a funny story because it was on the same time that the milk carton challenge was happening. And you might remember there was like this milk crate challenge that people would stack up milk crates, and then they'd try to scale the milk crates and try to get to the top and come down. And it was like breaking all kinds of people's legs and stuff. And in fact, it became a banned thing on social media. It got banned because everyone was doing it. And And I drew the same thing as having the 7 corbels, right, that take you up just like the chakras. And then at the top, you have this furnace that's creating the tree growing out of it, which is this merger of masculine and feminine at the Alpha Chi Omega point. The resurrection of Osiris, the Apis and Hathor, right? And this was like wild that I called it the alchemical union, the alchemical marriage. The sarcophagus, even with the gamma shape chipped out of it and the side. And I remember this post really well because it actually got me shadow banned on Instagram for 6 months.
Why?
Because I had the shape of the milk carton challenge on there for one reason.
Oh.
And secondly, because I had the word Isis written on here. And that was during the exact time of Isis K, which was the terror group. So then the AI said that I must be a known terror group supporter. So I ended up getting shadow banned on Instagram for 6 months because of that, which also is kind of symbolic. I was like touching on forbidden knowledge or something.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, of course, here's Cetus that you had pointed out. And all of these constellations look kind of weird, right? They almost look like Da Vinci's workshop of stuff.
Well, they were placed there by French astronomers. So that's what I was saying about, we kind of lost a lot in the Southern Hemisphere in terms of the original constellations because, there was a whole Renaissance period where they looked at the Southern constellations and they thought, well, we'll just map them out. And they started to put the apparatus of the time that they would have around them into the stars. And so that's why the Southern Hemisphere is kind of like this weird, unknown, not really been mapped too well because a lot of them have changed their symbol. But what I was going to point out on here was that Cetus is huge, right, in the stars. And this is really significant when we look at Cetus's pores, because that river that's going down, that's actually coming from the feet of Orion. And so that represents the Nile. And that also represents the central channel of the spine, so the central spinal fluid. And so Cetus putting his paws over is like a block. And so this is why we have
like
to...
a dam.
It's like the Rudra, right? Like you were saying about the Grunty, the Rudra.
The Rudra, yes.
It's like
good find.
It's like the knot.
Good find.
It's like the knot that you have to undo, right? Is to release the pores. And then we know, as we know with the Sphinx, that's what's underneath the pores of these animals, always treasure. And so we can see this Nile as like the parting of the Red Sea, where the Ark was moved from the age of Taurus into the age of Aries, because that's exactly where it is in the stars. And so the crossing...
Good find, my friend.
Yeah, but it just makes so much sense, doesn't it? And so it's so the crossing of the Red Sea of the Nile, and then right underneath the pores of the Cetus is this Ark of the Covenant, and it stayed in Aries. And that's why I was mentioning that it's interesting that our tropical astrology is aligned to Aries. And maybe it's this idea that because of the Ark was placed there, maybe that's kept us in this time frame of tropical astrology. But that's why I say this picture itself, it just says 1,000 words. And when you worked out on your hunch and to let people know that when we spoke and you were like, I think I know where this Ark of the Covenant is. And it was about, I don't know, maybe 2 hours. We spoke, and I was drawing, I was pinging you stuff, you were drawing back and pinging me stuff, and it was like 2 hours blitz of like intensive energy, and then all of a sudden it just arrived, and I was like, wow, that is it. And I was like, okay, you've convinced me. Because that's what I say, like at first we can see things and interpret things, but we have to actually align this with what the constellations and the star law. And so when and when I knew that this is like, well, I know what Eridanus is, that's the Nile, and then the crossing of the Red Sea, everything makes sense. The mythology, the stars, and it's right there. So yeah, you made a believer out of me, and it was like, it was so interesting. It was like a full download energy rush of like 2 hours intensive, and then through that came this idea of the Ark of the Covenant.
So it's so funny you say this, first of all, on this Cetus, because Cetus also sounds like Sita in the Ramayana story. So I checked to see if, okay, is Sita is a sea monster, and I checked, is it female or is it male? Well, it's the story from Andromeda and Perseus. And the story goes like this, that Cassiopeia, her mother, basically was bragging that she and her daughter were more beautiful than the Nereids, right? Nereids, or how you pronounce the name, which are these sea nymphs that are the nymphs of Poseidon. And remember, Poseidon is the father of Orion. So this is an interesting intersection. And so when Cassiopeia offended Poseidon and the Nereids for doing this and saying this, and it's kind of a common theme. We see the same story with Psyche and Aphrodite and the story of Psyche and Eros, right? And how she ended up having to do these like impossible tasks, right? We see the same story with the Trojan conflict story, right? Where Helen of Troy has her hubris and is bragging about her beauty. And so she ends up getting cursed by the gods and basically ends up in the wiping out of the Trojan people, right? So this is kind of a same archetypal story of hubris. Well, this monster is known as the Kraken in the story of Andromeda. So the Kraken is this horrible sea monster that Poseidon says the only way that you can make amends for having, boasted about the beauty of you and your daughter compared to the Nereids is to sacrifice your daughter Andromeda, the princess, to the Kraken, which is a female monster. It's a female sea monster, which is kind of very fitting, right? And of course, in different versions of the story, Perseus comes and saves the day. He falls in love with Andromeda, wants to save her, and after he kills the Medusa and gets her severed head that's able to cast its gaze and turn anything to stone. In one of the versions, he turns the Kraken into stone using the severed head of Medusa. And so he defeats the Kraken, which to me is really interesting because then, you're seeing really the wild feminine, the wild monstrous feminine, the dark feminine from the depths of the sea is now also at this guard gate position, guarding the entrance into a higher consciousness of the crown chakra. And here at the Shiva or the Rudra Granti, the knot, the final knot. Mm-hmm. And it's exactly symbolic of making this transit from the separation of gold and silver into the electrum, that this is the doorway. And so it's very fitting that the fornax is right next to this. Yeah, because it's basically a metaphor for what's happening inside of our brain. The Ark of the Covenant is actually inside of our brain. It's the sphenoid bone, right? And the wings of the Ark of the Covenant are the thalamus wings that are basically represented as we achieve and attain this higher consciousness through the crown chakra activation after passing our energetic sort of, life force energy through the Rudra Granti, which is also known as the place of Kali. And this is a representation of the wild, dark feminine that must somehow be integrated with this temperature increase of fornax, the furnace, to take it to this higher level of alchemy. And I find this really amazing that you just pointed out, of course, that this is crossing the Red Sea as well. And that's why the paws are crossing the Red Sea. The symbology here is profound. And just think about how much knowledge one would have to be able to find all of this stuff, because the amount of stuff you had to know about all the mythology and everything, and what I had to know about the Bible and the story of the Ark of the Covenant, which I've literally been studying as a hobby for the last 35 years of my life,
Wow.
In order to figure this out, that it's really the hidden Ark of the Covenant is really that which is in the stars. And it comes above the plane of the ecliptic so that the southern hemisphere stars of Fornas can be seen in the northern hemisphere at this moment in time, right when Osiris is born, around the 21st to 25th of December. And then through the resurrection, and that is in Aries. And so here we are again, solving this problem in the exact zodiacal transition that we're currently transiting through.
Yeah. And it's mind-blowing, isn't it? And we are literally today in the deacon of Cetus as well. So the timing's perfect. And as you were sharing about this, so just to give people an idea, when you look at this, is that Orion is to the top left. So where that river goes upwards to the top left, that's Orion. And
yeah, you can see Taurus right here.
Yeah, so
there's Taurus, right?
To the left.
This is the hoof of Taurus, and Orion would be to the left, right?
Yeah. So if you imagine out of the foot of Orion is this river that's flowing, but if we see it that this is going up to Orion, we could say that where Orion is where the Great Pyramids of Giza are, right? And so this
and that is exactly what it should be, right?
Yeah. So this is where the Nile comes down, and so this point where that third eye is, you could say, or let's say Orion is the crown. That third eye, where that knot is, that grunty knot, is where these pores would be, and where this alchemical marriage of the Ark of the Covenant in the third eye would be exactly there. And this idea of the knot, well, what you can't see on this is that attached to the head of Cetus, now I think this is going to be pretty awesome. Attached to the head of Cetus is weird. It's a ribbon. And the ribbon connects to the two fish of Pisces. And so when we went through the eclipse last year and the eclipse this year, the eclipse happened in the constellation of Cetus, and it specifically happened through the ribbon. And so the sun cut the ribbon, which held Pisces back through with the sea monster. So essentially, we severed the connection to the sea monster, and Pisces now can swim off into the age of Aquarius. And at the age of Aquarius, he's pouring the water into the fish's mouth. So it's really quite profound. The knot is actually found on the top of the head of Cetus, which is tying Pisces together. So this whole
at the crown.
Yeah, this whole connection of the knot and undoing the knot, letting the river flow, releasing what's underneath the pores. I mean, yeah, it couldn't be any more sort of profound to what we are experiencing. And your hunch about Fornax there. And when I looked and I thought, let's see if these stars actually draw out what they say they do. Because as I say, many different astrologers have their own interpretations. And so, when we started to draw it and work with the stars that are there, then you can pretty much create the exact dimensions of the Ark of the Covenant. So, yeah.
It's crazy. It's so crazy. But see, what's really interesting about this as well is that this is the story of the Rama Sita story. It's just told a different way. It's the exact same story. The Rainbow Bridge is basically analogous to crossing over into this new realm, right? It's the combination of the two. The Rainbow Bridge is where Sita gets saved, right? Because Hanuman ends up making the bridge of all the monkeys that attach their arms together to create the Rainbow Bridge, and that allows Ravana to be defeated, right? Mm-hmm. So I feel like we're now rewriting some of these mythological stories. That maybe Ravana doesn't have to be defeated. Maybe it could actually be that he becomes friends. Right. And I did that on ChatGPT. I actually rewrote the Ramayana story because I started realizing, wait a minute, this is a narrative that we've been given, but maybe part of our version of the narrative when we become lucid in the waking dream that we're in. Then we realize that we're the writer as well. And even the choice we had to rewrite the script was already known. It's funny. I watched this really funny thing on Alan Watts the other day, and he said there was a young man who said, damn. And it became increasingly evident that I am, as he said. No more, neither am I a bus, but I'm merely a tram. So this idea that he's living his life and going through ruts, he's not even steering his own bus. It's already predetermined. Like every single choice he made that he thought was his free will was actually already known and was already pre-selected as part of his experience. Yeah. And I think that's exactly what this is saying. And so as we get past the Rudra Granthi, which this is also where Shiva merges with Shakti. This is where Logos merges with Sophia. This is where the cave of Brahma fills with DMT and achieves this higher state of consciousness and enlightenment. And that is the purpose of the true Ark of the Covenant. This is all metaphor for what's actually happening inside of us and in humanity. And it's incredibly beautiful that you've got this Sita, that is literally the linchpin in the Ramayana story, that she has to believe she's worthy, that she has to come out of being in captivity and blocking this process in order to become the divine that she needs to be, as well as allowing that divinity, because it's only through her realizing the divine, the Kali realizing the Shakti, that Shiva can realize from, his wild stage, an angry stage, into the Shiva that we know as an ascended master. And this is the same story over and over and over again. Rama is the story running around with a bow and arrow trying to chase after the golden deer, which is relative to Sita. So the story is old as time, and it's been given in so many different fragments, right, among the stars all over the place, that we are now just becoming aware of this. But when we live in a mental matrix and we're living the waking dream, all we have to do is become aware of it for it to have a massive shift in our perception.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm so pleased that you brought that up, because this idea of the narrative is that often in the star lore, or what we've known in the West, has come through the patriarchal view, right? So there's the hero that saves the feminine, right? And of course, there kind of needs
to be the opposite.
There needs to be that sort of idea often when men are first developing, because they need a purpose, and that helps direct the energy. But what I wrote in the book, as you were saying about this, is I wrote that Cetus and the story of Andromeda was that in the end, Andromeda actually wasn't saved by Perseus. She recognized herself as the Christ light, or Sophia. So she broke her own chains. So she's the breaker of chains. And then Cetus is also seen as the sea dragon. And so she befriends the dragon and she becomes a dragon rider, right? And so this narrative of mother of dragons, breaker of chains, is what we see in the Game of Thrones. That's exactly where it comes from.
Wow. So what you're really saying is that Cetus is really the dark shadow of Andromeda in that context. And she became friends with her shadow.
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah. And so really what is Cetus stand for? Because it could be the sea monster, like you said, the Kraken, but it's also the whale, the great whale. But deeper than that, what does it represent? It represents the subconscious mind, that which comes from the deep, the depths of you. So when you integrate the subconscious, which is what Cetus is, which is where the Ark of the Covenant is being buried underneath the pores of it, when you allow it to come up to the surface and work with it, then the alchemy happens. And the second thing I just noticed is that on the left side of the river is Taurus, right? On the right side of the river is Aries. Well, remember I was saying about the sun exalts in Aries? Well, yes. The moon exalts in Taurus. So this is the central channel with the sun and the moon coming into alchemy. And then that's what Orion is Shiva Shakti, which is in the Vedic system of astrology. Orion is Nataraja, which is the dancing cosmic Shiva Shakti, which is what you see outside CERN. They actually have a huge one of this. So the sun and moon are perfectly linked here as well.
That makes total sense. Because in all of Matthias's work, he keeps talking about the significance of Geneva and CERN related to this exact story of the Ramayana.
Oh,
and
wow.
In fact, he brought Dear Jade onto the stage after she played her set at the equinox, and he basically proclaimed, because she was born there in the exact same spot, like literally in her backyard, is CERN.
Oh, wow.
And so he's like, we have to like fix time. So the story now needs to be rewritten. That's what this is actually about. And I love the story of the mother of dragons. I love the story of the merger. It's like changing the Ramayana story so that it's a redemption for all involved. It's not just that Ravana, who is the equivalent. So if Cetus is the monster of Andromeda, right? Then Ravana is the monster aspect of Rama. And both of them don't have to die. They have to simply become friends.
Yeah.
In both cases. And this is how you end up in the right place, and you end up an ascended master, right? So here you've got the harp as well, which of course the harp is associated with Lyra. And this is the harmony, right, that's coming right at this place where they have to merge.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the Ark of the Covenant right behind it, like hidden. It's fascinating, you know. And then speaking of what you just pointed out about this river leading up to, Orion, and Orion really sits at the throat, right? We already know that, and I'll just show you this real quick. We already know that Orion is related to the throat chakra, right? And the Hierophant stage, right? And so if we looked up right now, I'll just do a Google search on the Vitruvian Man.
Yeah, I definitely think this idea of when we look at the stars fresh, so we give homage to what's been, because that helps us understand kind of the narrative. But then when we look at it fresh, like we looked at the star alignments for the Ark of the Covenant fresh, and drew our own lines to see the proportions, then, as you're saying, it's almost like we can then start to recreate the narratives and look at these stars again, and they're revealing these deeper processes that we need in this current age. Yeah.
Look at this. So the throat chakra, Taurus constellation, is associated with the Hierophant card in tarot and the throat chakra. You can see the bull literally right on in the drawing.
Yeah.
Right here.
It becomes so obvious when it's obvious. Right?
Exactly. And just like the constricted and dilated pupil, and the left eye is dilated, the right eye is constricted, because this is the one looking at the sun and this is the one looking at the moon. That's why this has got a dark shadow around it as well. It's the eye of Horus and the eye of Ra. So this is the Hierophant card, and the Hierophant is associated with the elephant. Elephants are spoken of in terms of herds. Like you have a bull elephant, right? And we refer to them just like we do cattle. And they act a lot like cattle, but they're highly destructive cattle. I've been to Africa several times, and I'm telling you, they really leave a path of destruction.
Oh, wow.
Okay. This was at Burning Man this last year in 2024. There was actually a bull shape on the throat of the Burning Man, which was not there in the prior years. Just happened to be there this year, just like matching this.
And the idea of the burning man kind of reminds me of the seraphim, because they were said to appear as if they were on fire, that they
They're
were
on fire. That's right.
the seraphim on top of the Ark
With
of the
6
Covenant.
wings on fire.
Yeah.
That's right. Mm-hmm. So this is the way that the temples all represent the different chakras, different zodiac, and they all have different musical notes associated with them.
Yeah, exactly. So this picture here, you could say, well, that is that Eridanus, right, through the center. Remember I was saying that Orion was on that top left, so where the pyramids are. So then Cetus would be on the right. So it would either be where that image of the bull is, or the image of the sort of the cow or the bull in the middle. So it's on the right side. And so then now this could even be a map as to where the actual Ark of the Covenant potentially is, because from what I've found with the stars, it is as above, so below. So there could be a way to map those areas and find that fornax, to find that Ark of the Covenant.
That's a very good point. We'll definitely look more into that one for sure. But basically, this is, that point. Now, to this point, so then now I'll basically switch gears just a little bit, because we can go back now into the other discoveries that we found, right, that relate to what's on the wall in the King's Chamber. Let me just show you that. So this is Billy. Okay, here we go. Discovered last night was that the stars are actually etched into the walls as well. Not only the archetype of what. So we'll start this over. I discovered last night was that the pupils here, the stars, are actually etched into the walls as well. Not only the archetype of what the constellation is, but actually the stars themselves. So if you look at the post I did, you can see in the exact positions at the pupils of the eyes. Something told me the pupils of the eyes are actually the position of the pyramids, and that there was one right in the center as well. So there's one here, there's one here, and there's one here. And the way that they're positioned are exactly the shape of the pyramids in Orion's belt. And so I looked at Orion's belt to see if it was, a match, and yeah, it was a match. But then also I noticed that the Cygnus is the bird. So it's the black swan that's over the eyes of Orion. And so I kept asking myself the question, why? So here's the tail, but here's also the nostrils and the point of the nose. Exactly where the Orion stars are. And what I figured out was that at some point in time in our history, the stars of Cygnus, which are exactly the same shape as Orion's, overlapped exactly where the Orion stars are. So this is Altignac, Alnilam, and Mintaka get overlapped by Cygni in the Cygnus constellation, the swan. They get overlapped also by Satyr and by Guiana. I pronounced it wrong. It's Guiana. So those 3 stars overlap the 3 stars of Orion's belt. When they do is when the pyramid was built. So I looked up on ChatGPT to see what would happen, how, at one point in time in history, have those 3 stars overlapped each other. And of course, this means that Vitruvian Man and Orion is getting its wings. So it's basically becoming this full balance of masculine and feminine. And as a result is getting his angelic wings, right? Because that's the story of Enoch, who becomes an angel, becomes the angel Metatron. So what I found was that in order for that to have happened, it would have happened 12,800 years ago, which is exactly when the Younger Dryas was, and there's believed to have been a massive comet that hit the Earth at that time, which ended the Ice Age. And, ocean levels went way up and everything. So this caused a massive flood. And it also created what was believed to be a pole shift at that time. So the pole shift actually that was created was really problematic because it moved the Earth's tilt, its axial tilt, from its current position of like 24 degrees. We don't know what it was before. Nobody knows what the axial tilt was of Earth ever before prehistory. We just don't know. Everything after 6,000 years we know, but everything before 6,000 years we don't know. So 13,000 years ago, we definitely don't know. And what it would have required is for those three stars to be overlapping exactly like they are on the north wall of the King's Chamber. And also the nose is pointing towards Deneb. So that means Deneb was our North Star at that time. Then it would have had to be 12,800 years ago. And it would have had to be an axial tilt that is 53 degrees. Actually, it could have been as low as 29 degrees if you account for crustal displacement. So that's the Earth's crust basically peeling off. So 29 degrees is compared to 23.44 degrees that it is today. It might have been as high as 53 degrees. So 53 degrees would mean that you've got a massive shift. Yeah. So this is obviously another aspect of this that you could see that the Cygnus relates also to Orion, and that if you consider a pole shift, that it could actually have happened that there was a period in time when the two overlapped each other perfectly. And that you wouldn't have to have too much of an Earth tilt difference. It would only have to go to, it could have been as little as 29 degrees from the 23.44.
Mm-hmm. Well, I like the, Cygnus is the bird. It's the first deacon that we experience when we move into the age of Aquarius. So it makes sense why this would be coming forth now, because that Cygnus represents, in the Vedic tradition, is Saraswati. And Saraswati is the central channel. So that same Iridanos river, it's the same river, because they're in the Vedas, they had three rivers, and one of them, the Saraswati River, represented the central channel. And so there's this point where the three rivers, it's called the confluence of the three rivers. And that's where it happens at the third eye, that essentially the Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna all merge. And so that's exactly at that point of that Grunti, that Rudra. So all tying into Cetus and everything else. So yeah, it kind of makes sense why you find these wings, because that is, as you say, it's the sphenoid bone. It's the Ark of the Covenant within your own head. And so that alignment of Cygnus over there, it kind of feels like it's purposely made for this time. Like, as we are literally...
Well, and what's interesting is that this is the cosmic womb. Deneb is the star of the cosmic womb.
Mm-hmm.
And so the cosmic womb being the dark feminine as well.
Yeah.
Right. And so the fact that the nose is pointed exactly to that, in many cultures, like in Japan, when they say, "Are you talking to me?" They say, "Boku desu ka?" And they point to themselves at the nose, because that's where they find their seat of the self, mm-hmm. at the nose. So there's something about the self at the nose of Orion associating with the dark feminine.
Well, you're now just reminding me about, so in context of the womb, so that's the goddess Nut, right, in the stars. And so when she's sort of the Milky Way that's in that arc shape, that like Ark of the Covenant shape, is that where you'll see the womb, that's where Deneb is. And when you're speaking about the nose, well, I remember writing about that when you go back through to the sphenoid bone, you actually go through what they call the crystal galley, which is the Christ of Galilee, right? So through, and this is a medical term, the Christi Galley, and you go through that part, and you have the olfactory nerve that goes into the brain. And the olfactory nerve is this, it looks like this, where the story of Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer comes from. So it's the red bulb, or the Rudra, right? It's the red dot. And so the sense of smell and the nose is that passage through into the sphenoid, into the housing of the Ark of the Covenant.
We are in an epic matrix.
Yeah, it's pretty.
It's so, the detail is so mind-boggling. That's what just blows my mind every time. I'm giving a talk with Matthias at Lightning in a Bottle Festival in May, and the title of the talk is Living in Leela. Right, and that's the stage that we're in. And I'm now just getting this download to look up the etymology of the word cerebram, and cerebellum, right? And exactly what that means. Of course, we can associate it with the ram and the bull, which is the alpha and omega relationship. Alpha being the bull, Aleph, alpha means bull, and the ram is associated with Aries. So Aries would be on a clock at 12 o'clock. So that would be like midnight. And then, so it would be the omega, but it's also the alpha, and the first of the zodiac becomes the number one, which is the bull, and that's Taurus. And then the second would be Gemini, which is why it's shaped like a Roman numeral 2. And then the third would be Cancer, which is why it's a 9 and a 6. So it's 9 minus 6 equals 3, right? And you start realizing the whole thing is just encrypted with an obfuscation. It's a cryptographic technique.
That's kind of like interesting, because that's almost like one notch on the dial, right? So to what it really is. So it's almost like just a shift of a time to align it to the different zodiac, where now instead of Aries being the first, you've notched it in precession, you've taken it back one into midnight. So yeah, it kind of very interesting, that idea of flipping time with the zodiac.
Yeah, and then you could realize that it goes both directions. And that's what we found in Last Supper as well, right? That the shape of the bodies are going one direction, and then the associations right next to them, like right on the head of the second guy on the Last Supper table from the right, is the Taurus symbol, right? And you'll see a symbol of Aries right next to the head of the guy that's on the far right. But then you see their body shapes are in the opposite direction. So they're actually matching all of the zodiac. And this is well known, by the way. It's well known that the 12 apostles are associated with the zodiac. And we just saw it with this video that we watched on the association with Krishna, Mishnah, Jesus, with Horus. And it's basically the same story over and over and over again. So this is basically what we're seeing on the walls of the Great Pyramid is the origin story of humanity. It's the origin story that associates with all philosophical, metaphysical relationship to humanity's existence. And it's telling us that we're basically in our own mind matrix of our own creation, and that we are moving to a higher level of consciousness. And when we move towards the Satya Yuga, it just means we know the truth. Because Sat means truth. And we've been in the Kali Yuga, which is an age of destruction and probably lack of awareness. And all that needs to happen is we have to become aware to activate these things, the higher order DNA, the higher order existence, the ability to choose love over being right, because we have the context.
I mean, look at what we're doing right now, like with that Ark of the Covenant and Cetus, is that from a different vantage point now, it's the same archetype, same story, but now the narrative is shifting because we have greater understanding of it. And so then now that becomes part of our journey to work with. And so this is what I think, that all of our stories that have ever been and that ever will be are these stars, and then how they shift and change over time. But that then allows us to update narratives with the consciousness as we're progressing forward. And so it's like the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? It's like we can look at those star maps and keep the same narrative, or we can view it through our lens now and then say, actually, what I feel is this. And so when we see that it all leads, that river leads up into the union of Shiva Shakti. So it's like, well, that is where we are heading. That is our initiation to enter into Aquarius.
Well, and the good news is there's no mistakes. It's going to happen exactly as it's meant to.
Yeah, it's written in
And
the
we don't
stars.
have to stress about it. It's written in the stars.
Yeah.
All of this has been. So you've got something that you wanted to share with us related to, that I haven't even seen yet, that relates to the Sphinx and to Anubis.
Yeah, let me just some really exciting things. Again, this is the same principle of a new narrative of how we can perceive. All right, so speaking of the new narrative, this was at the same time as the Caffrey sort of leaked documents, and then we spoke about the Ark of the Covenant that same week. Then I was working with the Star Law, and I found this amazing revelation that the Anubis Sphinx has been hiding in the stars all along. And this can potentially correlate to part of our lost wisdom of our Egyptian mysteries. So in Gemini, with the deacons, we have the second deacon is Sirius, Canis Major, so known as the dog star, the wolf star. Also in Gemini, its third deacon is Canis Minor, the little dog. So this part of the sky is all about the dogs. And so like in Noah's Ark story, the animals go 2 by 2. In the stars, you can see the animals. So there's 2 lions, there's 2 dogs, there's 2 bears at one part in the constellation, and then you have a third. So it's all about these animals in twos. And so this part of Gemini, the twins, is where we find the dogs. So what's really interesting is that often gets overlooked is that the little dog itself is actually appears like it's riding another constellation. And this constellation is Monoceros, which is the unicorn. And so I was going into this and I'm seeing the dogs and I'm thinking, let's have a look at this unicorn, because a unicorn is kind of like one of those things. It's like a placeholder, because it's kind of like mythological, like it's not real, right? In a sense, in a metaphorical sense. So I thought, well, that's kind of unusual to place this unicorn in this place of the dogs. So this is a look at a star map, and this in particular is known as the winter hexagon. So these 6 points that we see is why it's called a hexagon, even though it may not look like a traditional hexagon shape. This point is connected to Gemini and Pollux in particular. This is Auriga and Capella, which is actually in Taurus. And then you'll see that it's joined to the Taurus constellation, where you've got Aldebaran. And then, of course, we know Orion and the star Rigel, which is Osiris. And there we have Sirius, which is Isis, and that's Canis Major. And then this little kind of line here is Canis Minor, which is the Procyon star. And this is known, the little dog was known as Anubis. So hold on a minute. We have Anubis,
which is the son. Anubis is also the son of Osiris.
Yeah, right. And we in here, so we have Anubis, Isis, and now Osiris. And this blue triangle is known as the Winter Triangle. And so this is a really special part of astrology when you start to link multiple constellations together. They're these asterisms that are sort of combine lots of myths and secrets. So here you see that it's connected in particular to the right arm of Orion. And that's significant because that's the point in which I shared that that's why I feel it's the 14th zodiac sign is because it's the right hand, which is the right hand of God. And so here we see this beautiful connection between these ancient Egyptian deities. So the winter triangle is essentially what we would call the underworld. And so the Milky Way runs through here. So it's like a portal between these three. And of course, Anubis, as we know, is known as the god of the underworld. Well, that makes exact sense in this configuration. So when we look at the glyphs of Orion, Osiris, Isis, and then we see this staff, well, it has the Anubis head on top, and behind it is the Milky Way. So Anubis sits right in the Milky Way, i.e. sits in the right place of where the underworld is, or the portal into other worlds. So we have this same configuration. And on this side, you've got the Pleiades. And so here, even in the hieroglyphs, we have this star lore story. So I took it one step deeper and I overlaid this on top of the Vitruvian Man. And I don't know if you knew that Orion's name was Sahu in Egyptian. Yeah. And it means the hidden one, right? Which is exactly this idea of the missing 1/14th. So if we follow Orion's belt, we'll come down to Sirius. Then when we move up that staff where Anubis's head is, that's that little dog. Then we have the shoulder, Betelgeuse or Betelgeuse. And so this now creates that winter triangle. So we can see that the glyph itself is connected to almost like the Vitruvian Man is holding the staff. So you could say that the Vitruvian Man is Orion. And when we overlay these star maps, we can now see that this winter triangle is all connected to the staff and Orion. So here you'll see the unicorn. And this is Orion's right arm. And you're seeing it actually from the perspective of space, looking sort of
from outer
space towards.
From outside.
So Orion, the right hand of God. Here we have the little dog, Canis Minor, and here's Sirius. You can see this triangle. And what's in the middle of the triangle is the unicorn itself. Well, what I noticed about the unicorn, that arrow is the river of the Milky Way. What I noticed about the unicorn is that in the back legs, there was no stars. So if you look at these circles, this is how you create constellations, by joining the dots. But yet in the back legs, there's no stars. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. And when I looked at the front part proportion of the unicorn, I thought that reminded me of something. So I chopped the back legs off and replaced them into the same position as the front. Now, I don't know if you can see where I'm going with this.
Yeah, I can.
But look at this. All of a sudden, this unicorn, mythical creature, now looks more like it's in the position of the Sphinx, right in the center of the winter triangle. So I looked at the actual stars and I joined the dots. And when I joined the dots, it created this position. Well, that doesn't look very much like a horse to me. That seems to follow the Sphinx line almost to the T, even with the paw coming out. So when I overlaid it, you can see that an interpretation of a unicorn actually is the concealment of the true Sphinx as Anubis, because it's in that part of Gemini in the sky. So when we overlay it on a star map and you connect these dots, you can see that it looks as if the Sphinx is facing Orion and the paws are guarding the 3 belt stars. So if we connect all the dots and the lines, you'll see how it begins to look much more like the Sphinx. So what I'm saying is that the interpretation of the unicorn, which was written in 1600s, and we don't know any previous interpretations before that, if we actually look at the stars and connect the dots in a different way that's similar, but now we just take it in a slightly different view, that it's not a unicorn, what else can it be? You can see that it takes the shape of Anubis. And so this fits the narrative of this is the point in the story of the dogs. And both of these stars were known as the dogs of Orion that would help him with the winter hunt. And so Anubis sitting there in the winter triangle is this idea that he is the god of the underworld, because that's what the winter triangle represents. And so these paws are connected to Orion's belt. And same thing with Cetus, guarding the secrets underneath the paws. What's underneath the paws? And so my belief is that with all of this, that the Sphinx connected to Leo, I feel that it was carved as a lion at that time in the precession. And then, of course, it moves in that precessional direction. So it goes from Leo towards Gemini. And I feel that in the age of Gemini, that Sphinx was recarved into Anubis. And then I feel that we got into what our modern understanding is, where things crumbled and then it was recarved how we see it today. So this, I think, is a missing piece of star lore that fits.
But you think ultimately that it should be a unicorn?
I think
what's interesting about this, right at the place where there's the horn, there's a hole in the top of the Sphinx's head.
Oh, yeah, like the ear of Anubis.
Yeah, well, right in the center, though, where there would be a horn coming out if it were a unicorn.
Yeah, well, this is why I say that the stars are these maps that we have to retrace our history. And we know that Egypt and all of those cultures, they were building these buildings in accordance with the stars. And so when you see this, that it literally is a Sphinx shape pointing to Orion, fitting the narrative, to me, that was this beautiful part of the Anubis Sphinx in the age of Gemini.
What else could that mean? Right? So with all the symbology going out there right now with everyone else, related to Regulus, like Chris Bledsoe and others, right? Everyone talking about Regulus and this merger of the Logos and Pathos and Aldebaran, and what we did also to open the Stargate and the Great Pyramid. There seems to be some sort of symbology that is reflective of the ascension again of Orion.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's right, the nose of Anubis is right on the right arm again, on the shoulder. And as we know, if he represents the underworld, then that's almost a bit like the subconscious of Cetus, right? It's
Wait a minute.
Of the secrets that's been kept hidden from us.
Okay, so what's the missing 1/14th supposed to be?
The phallic.
Phallus. Okay. Now look under where the left and right paw, because we're seeing it from the side, but it could easily be the left.
Mhm.
What is underneath that?
Yeah, exactly.
The phallus.
Yeah. Hmm.
So the Hall of Records. So maybe the missing 1/14th, metaphorically, is the Hall of Records. And that's why it's coming in right now with everyone's downloads and such that are all related to this latest work under the Khafre pyramid.
Yeah, that makes so much sense because Anubis, obviously, you could say the underworld is like underground. It's the subterranean, right? Like the subconscious. So this, yeah, it makes so much sense why what's stored underneath these paws of both Cetus and Anubis, the keepers of records, and like the food dogs in China, that they have their paw on the flower of life as like the keeper of secrets. And so to see this not as a unicorn in our modern day depiction, but to see it as what I truly feel it is, that fits the narrative. I think is exciting missing piece.
It's very interesting. Let me share screen for a second. Last week's news regarding the understructure beneath Khafre Pyramid from the SAR scan data. I noticed also that Leonardo da Vinci had encrypted the same type of understructure underneath his depiction of Khafre Pyramid. But in addition, I also noticed that the structure and the geometric forms that he encrypted within this illustration also matched that of the Tree of Life, extending all the way down. The Tree of Life, or Sephiroth, as it is also known, is a very famous depiction of the Tree of Life process along the hero's journey. Do these geometries hidden within this encryption match that of the Tree of Life? So I did some investigative work to find out if this is true, and sure enough, and shockingly, it does appear to match the Tree of Life. The dodecahedron is paired at the bottom, but it could also be at the top with Kether, the cube, the truncated icosahedron, and the elevated dodecahedron all showing up in the right places related to the Tree of Life structure. As this mystery continues to deepen, what else might we find underneath this pyramid? So this is interesting.
Yeah.
Revelation of what could be under Khafre Pyramid.
Say again, Rob.
No, I was going to say, I just want to share after this about what I found in your drawings in the King's Chamber and then the Last Supper that also confirmed about the Sphinx.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
The entire world, extending the structures and pylons to as much as 2 kilometers under the pyramids is just beyond anything anyone had imagined. 1 year and 1 month ago, I posted regarding this encryption of Leonardo da Vinci's work related to Khafre Pyramid. And I showed how the inner structures were matching the structures that basically were within the current pyramid itself. The slope angle matching 53.13 degrees, and the 3/4 proportion of 1/2 base over the height was prominently displayed. And in addition to that, if we look further at the language that is written in the upper right-hand corner, we can see there's a translation here. Having been armed with the Egyptian transcendental knowledge and with it 3/4 more power than usual, it is customary that the walls of the egoic fortress likewise acquire 3/4 more resistance than before. This is an encryption related to the 3/4 relationship of this pyramid. The 1/2 base over the height is 3/4. And you can see the reference there, and I've basically mirror imaged this so that we can read it. This is, of course, matching exactly the Khafre Pyramid. But today, I started to look underneath the structure in Leonardo da Vinci's depiction and notice pylons extending far beneath. Is it possible that da Vinci knew about these structures under Khafre Pyramid? And if so, how?
It's interesting stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely. There's been an opening, right? It's like an opening of consciousness, and that's why I say like Anubis is like that keeper of secrets. That's just somehow the underground connection of what's been buried is somehow is now surfaced.
We did open the Stargate, and we brought the new Earth through it on February 10th. And all of this stuff happened right after that.
Okay. Can you see this now?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I was saying. Like, it's so great that I found something in the stars and this narrative. And then I thought, let's have a look at your drawings in the King's Chamber and see if I can find it in the exact same position where it would be in the stars. And I could not believe it. I just opened up the image. My eyes took me straight here. And this is exactly where Gemini is in the part of the wall. So,
yep, right above the tree.
Yeah, right above the tree. And remember the staff of like Anubis that Orion's holding?
Yeah. The tree becomes part of the staff.
Yeah. And so this is exactly in the position. And so Orion's over here. And this is that head of the jackal of Anubis on top of the staff. And so this is why I thought, well, this is really amazing to find it. And then I thought, well, let's use the other reference of the Last Supper. And so I was tracing the walls and I found this face. And when I zoomed in, it's a picture of a dog on the wall. Again, in the right place. So this is where I was like, these intuitions, a bit like the Ark of the Covenant that you had, I feel like these things are now, we're able to see it. And I couldn't ever find this dog in the Last Supper before. And then through this connection of what you've been doing in the King's Chamber, I can then scan other things and then find these stories. So
incredible.
I wanted to share with you. I did this one to share for you on this, Robert, because I found a couple of interesting things. Was that the stars that are here, at the top here, they are actually called Chi and Chi, right? Chi Orionis. So the Alpha Chi Omega, these two are actually both called Chi. And what I wanted to show is that this line symbolizes the solar ecliptic, right? So where Orion is in the stars. This line is what they call the qualifying degree line. So any zodiacs that are in between those lines, they classify as a zodiac sign. And so what do you see? You see when I moved Vitruvian Man's arm up in the right angle of Orion, that the right hand is exactly in the position that qualifies it as the missing 1/14th zodiac sign. Another thing that I found was that from that star, that was, remember, the nose of Anubis, then you were speaking about the nose of Orion. And so when I did the calculation from this angle to where the arm lifts, it was the Great Pyramid angle.
Great Pyramid. Mm-hmm.
So again, you can see that Orion is Vitruvius because he's literally holding the bow and arrow right here. And if we just shift the arm positions, we can calibrate it into Orion. So when I looked into old star maps, I found this actual image that an astrologer had done of Orion. And you can see the 3 belt stars here. And he's in the exact position of like the Vitruvian Man. So it's another...
You see the 3 belt stars on the Vitruvian Man's abdomen.
Mm-hmm. So it's
see
another...
them? The diamonds. The diamonds that are right up, and you see the diamonds right there. And then it looks like the navel is the Sphinx.
Oh, I see. I like it. Yeah. So again, like through different star maps, older star maps, you find different astrologers have drawn these constellations slightly differently. But to this one, I was like, wow, it's literally, I'm here. This is me. I'm the Vitruvian Man. So going back to what we were saying about where the Ark of the Covenant is, that was about here. And this is that river that runs to Orion's foot. So for those that don't know, the foot being higher represents the sort of the left foot is the Kundalini foot. That's like the sacred foot. So that's like your heavenly foot. And the foot that's touching the ground, that's sort of your earthly connection. So you've got a heavenly connection and earthly connection. And so the right foot is actually on top of Lepus, the hare. So really that alchemical process happens, and then we flow into the river into Orion. And this is where
this is where the term "follow the white rabbit" comes from.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is the Easter bunny, that we have. And so, yeah, follow the white rabbit because it's right under Orion. And this is the same symbol that I was saying that is the Nataraja. So you can see here that the left foot is up and the right foot is down. And this is Shiva Shakti.
What's it on top of? What's that on top of?
Yeah, so this is known as the dwarf man, or this represents the ego. So it's the transcendence or dancing on top of the egoic self, which also represents forgetfulness. So this is the image that's at CERN. And we can just see it, that actually this is Orion. And that's why I say that when you view different cultures, they have different ideologies of it, but it's all the same story.
Epic, man.
So this was the final thing I wanted to show you because it has a connection to your logo. In the Vedic tradition, Shiva holds a drum called a damaru, the damaru drum. And it looks like this hourglass shape, right? The idea of time. And so the symbol for Shiva's drum is this symbol here. And this is from the Sri Yantra, the integration of Shiva Shakti. And so your symbol of Orion, the downward facing triangle and upward facing triangle that you did, like that can be traced into the very heart of the Sri Yantra. So again, this connection of what you found in the King's Chamber as this symbol is also in the Vedic tradition of the Sri Yantra, and it's our star constellations. So it's becoming undeniable that this is what it's all about. That's why I say all these stories are, the highest teachings are pointing us back to Orion. And for Orion not to be a zodiac sign, it feels like a bit like the unicorn was placed there to hide Anubis. It feels like Orion was cut out of the zodiac, and we've only just integrated the 13th. And so now I feel like this next shift is for us to integrate the 14th as the Shiva.
That is super epic work. I love that. I really, really love that. And it reminds me of this. Go ahead.
I got one more I just realized in here. You're going to love this one. Well, I know you love Arcturians and the whole connection of Arcturus. And so this was really interesting because I thought, well, if there is a right hand of God, and being on the right hand, as you know, it's being on the right side of the throne of God. And you mentioned about the throne room in the Great Pyramid. And so Metatron was known as the right hand of God. And so I thought, well, what would be its mirror? Is there a mirror in the stars? And look at this constellation. This is Bootes.
Oh.
And right here,
it looks like Meritaten
is Arcturus. So
it literally looks like a female archer form because the proportion of the waist and everything is smaller. It reminds me of Artemis for some reason.
Well, I mean, it's the left hand, so it would normally represent the feminine. But this Bootes is actually known as the ox herder, right? So the bull herder. So Bootes is Arcturus, but it's also King Arthur, because it's also known as the guardian of the Great Bear. So now we have this mirror constellation here where they're almost identical. And like you said, it depends how you perceive it. One could be masculine and feminine, or there's two sides of the same coin. But yeah, it's so amazing. So Bootes is in Virgo. It's right on the last part of Virgo before we get into Libra.
Wow, epic. Super epic. Wow. Okay, you blew my mind on that one. So let me show you this. It's kind of directly related to what you just said. And you could see this little man, the ego of the little man. So you look at there, and now we're going to look really close here. Whoops. And you could see the eyes, the eyebrows of this little, like, old man with a beard and everything, and this weird shaped head, and the number 9 on his forehead as well. And it's encrypted right in between the two, this little man, this egoic man, that somehow he gets subjugated or put in the background when these two merge. And it's at the Ark of the Covenant. So this table is right above, and this is exactly where the Alpha and Omega are. His right wrist is over where the Alpha is. It's on the 33rd inch, which from the corner, from the southwest corner, which Alpha is in mathematical constant terms. It is Alpha, the constant of 1/137. And of course, the 33rd inch is representative of the 33rd prime number, which is 137. So each of the inches represent the prime numbers. And there's a total of 89.62 is the number of inches of the entire sarcophagus. And of course, 89 is also a prime number, and it's also a Fibonacci number.
Yeah, I mean, this, I wouldn't have believed it about this image of this little man in there if I hadn't zoomed into the Last Supper. And you can see it. And that's why I say once you get through that first sort of layer and you find the first one, then it's not so difficult to see the other ones. But this kind of makes sense of, think about that journey from Cetus, that Ark of the Covenant, where you're moving into Orion, and then you've got the ego before you become Shiva Shakti, like the final dwarf part of the egoic self. And it reminds me of that film with Keanu Reeves when he's the Buddha. I don't know if you've seen that one.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And that's like that was like his pre-incarnation before Neo. You know, it's kind of like the film sequence. But at the very end, you know, the sort of demon dwarf ego man shows himself at the very, very end before he reaches enlightenment. So it feels this narrative is being played out here through the stars, through the Last Supper painting also.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just looked up the 89th prime number as well, because that would be the length of the sarcophagus. And that comes out to 1/.00216.
In the top,
which is 432 association.
Yeah.
Remember, the sarcophagus is 0.432, the width of the entire room of 10 cubits. So it's 4.32 cubits is 89.62 inches. And then the width of the sarcophagus, that's the length of the sarcophagus, the width of it is 0.432 of that. And 432 squared is the speed of light.
You said about 126 being doubling the octave.
126 is doubling the octave. This is 216, which is the moon.
Oh,
it's the moon's diameter.
Yeah, and the resonance.
So you've got sun and moon encrypted into the sarcophagus, and the emergence of light from the dark.
Wow. And it's right sitting there in the middle between them.
Yep. Yeah, and you could see, you know, the omega on her on her clothing right here, which is also the shape of the Libra,
Well,
right?
that's
And
really
you can see the face of the elephant right here. You can see the trunk of the elephant.
yeah.
He's a Scorpio on his head. All this stuff is embedded in this stuff. It's insane.
It seems like right there in the stars where they are, their positions, that exact point where that demon is also the exact point where the child, Arcturus, is in her womb. So it's almost like it's either the demon or it's the Christ child.
Well, and you do know that Edgar Cayce said that when people die, they go back to Arcturus.
Interesting.
That we're from Arcturus, we come through the Orion's gate, which is Al Nilam, and we come to Earth, but it's back to Arcturus that we return as spirits.
Well, that makes so much sense because it's the star Spica. Spica is in the womb of Virgo. And when you actually look at the star constellations, that what's born is Arcus, and that's the Arcturian, the child, and then he grows up to be Bootes, which is that constellation I showed you, the left hand. And then inside Bootes is Arcturus. So the story of the Christ child is basically it becomes Arcturus, becomes Bootes, and then obviously that is the mirror reflection of Orion. So it's like the same, it's the same, just spoken in a different way. And it's the ox herder, you know, the connection to the bull.
Yeah. I just asked chat to read this, you know, and basically I'll read it. It says, I said, what exactly did Edgar Cayce say about after death, humans return to Arcturus? Yes, Edgar Cayce, the American mystic and sleeping prophet, did reference Arcturus multiple times in his readings, particularly at staging point or gateway for souls after death and between incarnations. Cayce's key ideas about Arcturus, the gateway to higher realms. So it's interesting that it would be this reflection of Orion, right, which represents humanity. Arcturus is described as a portal or intermediary between the physical and spiritual realms. It serves as a passageway through which souls travel during their reincarnational journeys. Home of advanced beings. He referred to Arcturus as the home of highly evolved, spiritually advanced beings. These beings assist in soul evolution, guidance, and healing between lifetimes. Transition after death. After death, souls may pass through Arcturus or be guided by its influence on their way to other dimensions or before returning to Earth. It functions somewhat like a cosmic customs point, like a way station, a frequency filter or checkpoint for determining the next phase of the soul's path. Vibration and consciousness tuning. Arcturus is associated with higher frequency light, healing, and consciousness rebalancing. Cayce suggested that spiritual attunement to stars like Arcturus could aid human evolution on Earth.
You know,
Arcturus is that which may be called the center of spiritual thought, as the sun is the center of physical force. Symbolic role is the bridge between life and afterlife, the conduit of spiritual wisdom and transition, the stargate of the soul's journey home. It is the 5D civilization entry point. So this is really fascinating. You know, and I'll just leave. I think we go ahead. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah. What that made me think of, you know, when we were speaking about how Orion was mapped in the King's Chamber. And you saw Orion as one way, and I thought Orion was another way in the King's Chamber. And you were saying about the westing and facing east. Well, if we think about it, this makes sense now that the Bootes would face one way and fit inside the King's Chamber, and Orion would face the other way and fit inside the King's Chamber, because they're like mirrors, but from the east and west positions. So this idea that it could be this way or that way, I think it's just maybe the different way in which we see the either Bootes in the King's Chamber laying down or facing, or Orion.
So let me show this.
The deacon of astrology are 36. different astronomical constellations that fit within each zodiac sign, including the Orion
Okay,
constellation.
let's skip to the end here.
Eagle. These are the four faces represented in the book of Ezekiel for the children of Israel and their encampment. Is the king's chamber telling us something more? That if the sarcophagus is in the right position at its center point, covering the three belt stars, and we look around the room with each block having a different X, Y, Z axis, and each having a different constellation associated and tied to it, the 144 blocks tying together to the 48 constellations, we have to ask ourselves the question, is the king's chamber a Stargate?
100% for me.
Yeah, me too. For sure.
And yeah, I just think that we're at such a great time of these revelations coming and making more and more sense of them. And I love the fact that so many more people are seeing astrology as part of their evolution or part of their path, and that it's not just sort of predictions of the future, or it's not sort of just a whimsical idea. It's an integral science. It's our oldest science that we have, sitting around the campfires, looking at the stars, sharing stories as elders to the next generations to carry those wisdoms. And I think now this is showing up from the great artists like Leonardo da Vinci through the great wisdom of the pyramids and other sites, that it was so important to them. And so it should become as important to us now.
Totally. Totally right. Well, Rob, what an epic discussion. You know, what a journey we've been on, and we're not done yet. I think that we are going to absolutely be decrypting even more of this. And as we do, the pace seems to be accelerating very, very rapidly, like literally. And it seems to also be tied directly to these alignments and constellation, you know, sort of eclipses, as well as all the energetic shifts that are happening. We are definitely on a super starship right now, somehow, some way, increasing our consciousness and realizing that really the Ark of the Covenant is within. It's about us learning to finally forge this alloy, the electrum, between the feminine and the masculine, the heart and the brain. And I think you're right. I think in this case, it's not going to be the divine masculine that comes in to save the day. I think it's going to be the divine feminine that wakes up and says, I'm going to basically jump in and control what I'm going to control. And I hold the missing key. And I think that's exactly what it should be. And maybe that's where we'll find the missing 114th. I do believe that it's going to be somehow, I don't think it's a metaphor. I do believe that the reference to the missing 114th is going to be tied to the Hall of Records.
I love that.
That totally makes sense.
Yeah. And underneath these paws that are guardians.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for allowing me to come on and share, and also for connecting. You know, it was so great to have the opportunity to share with you, and I just feel like that King's Chamber was just a miraculous combination, and you know, to be part of your Indiana Jones explorations, and then to witness that and be part of that in the latest sort of intense discovery of the Ark of the Covenant. You know, it's so beautiful when you can combine and bounce and share and bring through things to share with others. That it's been a really great journey, and it's been great to see that from when I first saw you doing geometry to now, and what you're doing and sharing. So I feel super privileged to be part of that, and to know you, and thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you, my friend. So there's one little bonus thing I forgot. So let me bring this one up to you because I think that you can actually help us solve this little problem too. This was the work of discovering the 2 new pyramids. And I think it directly ties to not only Orion's Belt, but Cygnus.
We're looking for the 4th pyramid of Giza. And I've been looking at satellite photography and everything to find the exact spot, and I think we're going to be able to find it. So there's several explorers that came here and cartographers that came here between 1457, which was Fra Mauro, an Italian explorer, and he showed 5 pyramids on the Giza Plateau. There was another explorer by the name of Pocock that came in 1743 that showed 5 pyramids as well. And then in 1755, Norden, who was a Danish explorer and cartographer, came and depicted from an aerial view 4 pyramids. It had also a ground level view of 4 pyramids that has now become quite famous. And so we're here investigating to see if we can find this 4th pyramid on the Giza Plateau. It's supposed to be on the south side of Menkaure Pyramid, so it would be southwest of Menkaure Pyramid. So let's go check it out.
By the way, I don't usually wear a suit when I go spelunking like this. That was because I was presenting to the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities, and I was shocked when they let me go and do it right after. I wasn't going to go back to my hotel and change.
I say it looks brave.
It's cut lines and mortar joints here. Full lines coming down right here. Here, 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 here. The vertical lines, blocks. This is cut. It's not natural. It's a cut right there. Another cut. There, another cut. Here. Another cut here.
You can see the joint construction right there too, like a Lego. That's the construction technique used on the Great Pyramid.
So now I'm following the map of Pocock that showed there was a 5th pyramid here on the Giza Plateau, and it's exactly in this spot. That's right next to the other pyramid, which is there, that someone built a chimney on top of. Which is kind of funny because it even looks like a pyramid from the side. Look at the angle. Like a pyramid. These are most definitely blocks.
So they're actually blocks there.
Yep.
Well, is this the 4th pyramid of Giza that was described by both Pocock, the explorer, and also by Norden, 1755? The only way to know is to excavate. So I think it's now up to the Egyptian government, the Ministry of Antiquities, to decide to excavate this to see what we can find underneath all of this sand. I think they're going to find a pyramid, and I think they're going to find one right over there as well. Have a great day, everyone. All the best.
So
Yeah, that was kind of like someone said, on social media, there was like, oh, that was like a mic drop moment, dude.
So
I just walked out of the Giza Plateau and like within 5 minutes find 2 pyramids.
yeah. So what's going to qualify them as pyramids if they dig deep enough and find sort of organized blocks? Is that the qualification of it to be known as a pyramid?
I'm losing you a bit right now.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I was just wondering what will qualify it as a pyramid? Is it because they'll find like cohesive blocks underneath if they excavate, or what is?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, if there's any blocks at all, then it's man-made. It's not a geological, natural formation.
All right. And I saw the image of I think the fourth one that you showed, and the wings of Cygnus do actually kick up like that. Most of the time when Cygnus is drawn, we just see it like a cross, but it's actually got many more connections to it, and the wings sort of go out and then kick up. So where the pyramids align, and then it would be back. That fourth one, I don't know where the fifth one was, but the fourth one for sure looks like it could.
Yeah, the fifth one, what I noticed is if you mirror the right side of Cygnus, it ends up in the fifth pyramid position. So it's like on the, okay, kind of a bad connection right now, but if you look at the fourth pyramid position, it's where the star is exactly. But then if you mirror the right wing side of Cygnus as well, it shows up in the position of the fifth pyramid. It's pretty uncanny. So then I have to wonder if there's something else on the right side of Giza, out by where the Great Pyramid is.
Yeah. There's like a balance. Yeah. And it seems like this idea of the mirror constellations of Bootes and Orion, the mirroring of Cygnus, it feels like the left and right hemispheres are really trying to come together into that Ark of the Covenant.
It's the Shiva Shakti combination. It's literally so divinity is not defined as being devoid of sort of darkness. Divinity is being in perfect balance with the darkness. Divinity is when we can accept the darkness and then learn to fly, as it were. So this is when we become lucid in the dream and we realize that there was no good or bad, that all the battles we were fighting were just our own ego related battles because we were choosing to be right instead of to love. And when we choose love instead, we transcend this notion of good and bad. And we learn to become friends with our shadow. And that is divine. We no longer choose to be right over loving.
It's the mother of dragons, breaker of chains.
Absolutely.
Become a dragon.
How can people find you? First of all, I want to say your book, The Lost Octave, is a must read for everybody. So check out The Lost Octave by Robert James Comber. And where can they find more about your work?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, just on Instagram and Facebook, it's just Robert James Comber on there. And the website, obviously, thelostoctave.com. And you'll see all of you'll actually be able to look at the deacons as well in there and find information about those and the images. And I've recreated the deacons in a more modern way for our age. And you can learn about that and also the new stuff that's coming through and what I'm sharing. But yeah, especially on social media, because it feels like breakthroughs are happening they're just happening on a weekly basis. And so I post all the new stuff that comes out, and it's exciting new ride.
Awesome, man. I really, really enjoy working with you. Thank you for your brilliance and your genius and for listening to your intuition as well. And it's a real pleasure to work alongside you, and I wish you all the best. And I know we're going to do so much more still.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Robert. Lovely to chat with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Until next week on Think Tank, have a great week, everyone.